Right, listen, look, I'm really excited you're here. I just told you a second ago, you're like, I've done about 300 podcasts. I think what you have to say is like in the top 5 most important things that people need to hear. So that's huge. And it's because I think what you're going to now talk about in a second expands essentially why we're seeing things in the world around us. Like, I've talked about how everything's linked, but I didn't really have the evidence to back it up. And what I mean by that is, what's this trans agenda that's just suddenly mushroomed and exploded out of everywhere? What is it with this attack on white people and, promoting black and brown and ethnic people over straight white people? Like, I'm a brown guy. You can see it. I'm the son of an immigrant. I feel it's wrong. I feel like white people are being disadvantaged now. And we're getting this kind of like token, we are inclusive. But what it is we want diversity of color, but we don't want diversity of thought. And then I'm seeing all the wars, I'm seeing all the pandemics, all this sustainability, constant fucking, and it's like, what does that even mean? Like, what is that even all about? Then we've got the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusive, whatever, and then the ESG scoring that corporations get, and then the pandemics, and then in the background, you got WEF and Klaus Schwab, and you will own nothing and be so happy. And I actually think I'm a victim of all of this because I was cancelled when I started talking about the vaccines and the trans agenda by one hospital, and another hospital cancelled me when my guest spoke about the atrocities going on in Palestine and Gaza. And I feel like the hospitals were in themselves kind of like under pressure. You've got this guy with a big social media profile. He's saying the wrong things. It's not good for us. The optics are bad. And we've got shareholders and banks and loans. And you know what? This is going to reduce our score. So get rid of that piece of shit. So it was business. It wasn't personal. It was like, we just don't need this shit. Get rid of him. And I think, yeah, like in the background of what I've just painted, right? I see all this crap. I think it's all linked. And then you come along and I see you on Dr. Stephen Frost's show and I love him. And it ties it all together, this thing called stakeholder capitalism. Dude, what the frack? Like, first of all, tell me, what made you get into it? Because you got a BBC or TV background. How do I know you're not just some MI6 planted agent? Or are you a genuine good guy who's figured out the shit? Like me, a good doctor. Most doctors are asleep. I've come from a profession that's heavily indoctrinated. Are you equally like me from a profession that's equally indoctrinated and just suddenly one day realized, actually, there's some really bad shit going on? Tell me, what happened? That's a big intro. I appreciate it.
First of all, thank you for inviting me on. I appreciate that. And it's really great to see you. So yeah, there's a big question now. So there's a lot of questions that I'm going to start with. So to start with, you're absolutely right. Stakeholder capitalism is the most important thing for people to understand. It is a new political system that was enacted in 2020, and we reached full stakeholder capitalism by 2030. So everything that we've seen that's very strange happening since 2020 is the result of stakeholder capitalism. So that's why it's important for everyone to understand. And
that's a big statement.
And that's why I'm serious about it. And I've devoted everything I have into learning about it and creating films to inform people about it. So stakeholder capitalism was a political system that Klaus Schwab designed in the late 60s, early 70s, along with his mentor, who was Henry Kissinger. And I'm assuming they were trying to design a way to shift the entire world to a new global political system. So during the late 60s, or during the 60s, the Cultural Revolution was happening in China. And that was the name of China's decade-long shift to communism. And what Mao did was to indoctrinate the working class to believe they were oppressed by the capitalists, by free market capitalism. And he encouraged them to join social justice movements such as the Red Guards and to go out there and physically overturn capitalism in favor of communism. Millions of people died during that transition. And you see that while Mao explained that the working class were oppressed, it ended up everyone becoming oppressed today in China. Now, Klaus Schwab and Kissinger were witnessing this, and they decided to create a new political system called Stakeholder Capitalism that included the same playbook as Mao used. And that playbook is called inclusive. So the inclusive ideas are essentially, it's essentially cultural Marxism. It's to say a subset of the community are oppressed, and we need a new political system to make everyone more inclusive. So that's why you hear inclusive a lot. And I'll come back to that soon. So I'm going to come to present day and help or explain what stakeholder capitalism is. So Klaus Schwab, so actually in 2020, we saw the pandemic and we saw a rise in authority. We saw all the things you were explaining, the rise in censorship, the rise in authoritarianism around the world. And it was all for our safety.
Always.
Yeah.
Always couched in the nice words. Even the climate hoax, it's because we're saving the planet. It's always layered with, look how good we are and we're doing the right thing. We're doing things to help people. It's never like, we're taking over your rights and locking you up.
Absolutely.
Because we're bad people.
It's because communism's an ideology. The only way that you can get an entire nation of Chinese, over 1 billion people, to accept communism, an authoritarian system which exploits their human rights, is to make them want it. So the way that tyrants get people to want an authoritarian system is to make them believe that that there is something wrong with their existing system, make them feel angry that they're oppressed or fearful that something's happening in the world. And the only solution is to give away their freedom. So that's how tyrants shift an entire nation of people to communism, to make them believe that they'll be safer under a new system.
Mate, 100%. So very, very quickly, I know you want to move forward in time, but let's go back to the Cultural Revolution. China was, had a dynasty, and then the Communist Party come in, and they took away private land ownership, property rights, and that process of bureaucrats telling people how to farm the land and everything created the famines, and millions of people died as a result. And they had crazy ideas like anyone who was associated with the past was an oppressor. And you literally had young kids going around beating their teachers and beating elders. And it was humiliating, and it was meant to be so-called, giving power to the people. You had the fist, like the Black Lives Matter, everything that we're seeing now, LGBTQ rights and, Black Lives Matter. It was almost like that, but on a mass industrial scale. And it was creating this fear in the population that you're oppressed and you're this and we need to do this to overcome it. And it was mass hysteria, mass hypnosis of the population, who then fell for giving up their freedoms and rights, removing their previous cultures and religions, and adopting something that basically enslaved them. Now, what I want to ask you is, when they were doing that Cultural Revolution, most people, they weren't into communism, were they? They weren't into that idea of communism. They didn't know what was laying ahead of them, were they? They were just told, you're oppressed. Was there genuine oppression going on from the capitalist era? I mean, was there something for them to hold on, or was it all just magnified and hyped up and exaggerated?
Well, Karl Marx and Engels hypothesized that once the working class realized they were oppressed by the capitalists, they would rise up and overturn capitalism in favor of communism. And so tyrants have used that idea, cultural Marxism or Maoism, as it's now known, to indoctrinate the working class to believe they're oppressed and to get them to want a new political system. So under free market capitalism, no one should be oppressed. Free market capitalism is the economic system. Excuse me. And what affects the economy, of course, affects society. So So free market capitalism is also called shareholder capitalism. So the control is given to the shareholders, the people who own the companies, us company owners. And we have the freedom to trade with whoever we want to in the interest of generating profit for our companies, for us shareholders. But the idea that Mao propagated was to say, actually, the working class, you're oppressed by these guys, these capitalists, the company owners, the landowners. excuse me. And he manipulated them to join these social justice movements, these red guards, and encouraged them to go out there and beat any capitalists. And a lot of people died during that.
Shop owners, business owners. Because the thing is, people need to understand that
teachers, their own teachers at school.
Yeah, being a capitalist doesn't mean that you're a rich oligarch, billionaire. You're just someone who runs your own business, and I'm not against that. Like, this is a business, and I think if you work hard, you produce something that other people want and desire, you should be rewarded for it. You should get paid for it. But that goes against communism. That communism doesn't believe in that, does it?
Well, it's more based upon a socialism idea where the ownership of all goods and services are distributed evenly among the people. So the Marx idea is essentially to shift ownership of everything to the government under socialism, and then once they have control of everything, then the government gives everyone equal ownership. But what tends to happen under tyrannical systems is that the government take control, and then they use that control to then enforce tyranny on the public, and they never actually reach full communism. So,
yeah, I get that. Because one of the things, when I've looked into, for example, the Soviet Union, is they say, you will own nothing. We will give everyone the same. Doesn't matter if you're a teacher, doctor, laborer, whatever. It doesn't matter. Everyone gets the same. But that's not strictly true. The people at the top, the Politburo, while everyone's eating, porridge, they're having steak and wine and cigars and living it up. There was definitely a two-standard living of, back in the Soviet Union era. Like the people at the top who were ruling were living it up. They had a good life. That's not communism in my mind. That's like, I thought everybody, regardless of who they were, would have the same standard of living and same, access to goods and services. But there was definitely a tier system. And that's the same in China, isn't it? They have different opportunities and different financial, gains depending on where they are in the hierarchy.
Mm. And anyone in China who disobeys or breaks the rules that are set by the government are punished for doing so. So there will always be psychopathic tyrants in the world, right? That will always exist. And occasionally some will get into power. And we've seen in China, for example, just how easy it is to manipulate people into wanting something different, into thinking that what they have is bad or, wrong in some way, and to want a different system. So it's all through manipulation. And we've seen that over the last, since 2020, but it's been happening a long time before that, just to prepare us, because this plan that they created, which was called the Great Reset, which is actually shortened from the Great Reset of Capitalism, is the name of the 10-year transition away from free market capitalism here in the West to stakeholder capitalism. It relies on propaganda. It relies on getting people to, one, become scared, which we saw during the pandemic, and people were then willing to give away their freedom and be locked down and close their businesses in order to feel safe. And they also use, so the inclusive ideas is also about making people angry, making a division between two different cultures, which is during the Cultural Revolution, it was the working class and the the people who own the businesses. Today, it's they're targeting black people and trans people to say you're oppressed, and in order to make you more inclusive and create a new system, we need to transition away from free market capitalism, because that's the system that's making you oppressed. We need to transition you to a new political system. and that's stakeholder capitalism, which we'll come on to.
Yeah, let's come on to that in a second. And like you said, it's not new, by the way. None of this is new. So I was pulling up a quote, and this is by Benjamin Franklin. This is like 200 plus years ago. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. It seems like this trick that they've been playing is not new.
No.
They offer you that safety, and in return, you think, you have to give up your liberty. End up with neither. And this is a trick, but people keep falling for it because people want to be safe. People get uncomfortable. And that's why I keep telling people you need to become more resilient physically and mentally. And you do that. One of the ways you do that is by being physically fit, because sick people are easily exploitable. But anyway, I just want to recap and then go back to Klaus Schwab and his origin and links with Henry Kissinger. If you look at communism, my understanding recently is that, oh my God, it was actually funded by the New York bankers and the international cabal. It was like unbelievable. And it was like, what? Because it's like the exact opposite to what you would think. But then you think about what it is they're doing. One of the key things in the 10-point Communist Manifesto is you want central bank. You take away private property. And it's almost like communism isn't just a thought experiment. It's actually a physical experiment of a way to strip people away of their rights, their money, their wealth, and concentrate it in the hands of a small group of people. The oligarchs, the technocrats, the bureaucrats, that class of people. And in the other side, we had, free market capitalism, but it's not really. I don't even think we really have free market capitalism. It's crony capitalism. It's subsidized by the government, contracts with the government, which is very shady, backroom deals being made. And, basically, we don't really have a true free market capitalism in the West anymore. I don't know how long we might have had it, but we do not have it. We have this illusion of it. But basically, the difference between the two systems is it's an experiment. Like, which system can extract the most amount of wealth from the individual while keeping them pacified and happy and not causing rebellion and revolution, and which is the best control mechanism. And so they tinkered with it. Like, let's give these guys in the West a little experiment. Let's do the one with the communists. Let's see who can be the most productive, which slaves will work the hardest. And they came up with the idea, actually, if the humans think they're free, they're probably more likely to be productive. Whereas if they're miserable and caged up, then it's not that productive. So communism 1.0 didn't do that well. Let's demolish that. Let's now create communism 2.0, which has got a lot of the trappings of original communism, but with the veneer of you're free, this is in your best interest, you're a good person for doing this, you're saving the planet, you're not racist, you're a kind person. And we then create our own prisons, we design them, we build them, we march into them, and we thank our jail keepers on the way in, say, thank you, thank you. I feel like that's what now stakeholder capitalism is all about. Am I right?
Yeah, we've been quite complacent. We've been very complacent here in the West, thinking that the government have got our best interest at heart. That we live in a democracy. We vote for a prime minister or a president, and they're going to take care of us, and we can just not worry. We can get on with our lives. And
dude, Trump's in now. Don't you understand? Everything's fine.
I've got some opinions on that. Maybe a bit later.
Maybe a bit later.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right. It's an illusion. It's always been there, that element of control. But they've been very clever, because us in the West, we especially since the Second World War, we've been people that will fight for our freedom. So they were quite clever to provide this illusion that we live in this democracy, in this free world, and we got this political system where we get two people to vote for, both. It's two heads of the same coin. Doesn't matter who you vote for, you're going to get the same policies. And this instance, what we're talking about is stakeholder capitalism. And then that person's in power for 4 years, and that's a dictatorship as far as I'm concerned. They've got all this power for 4 years. So yeah, it's always been there. And Klaus Schwab has tried to enact stakeholder capitalism on many occasions. He actually founded the World Economic Forum in the early 70s for the purpose of enacting stakeholder capitalism globally. So that's
50 years in the making.
Yeah, so that's the reason why the World Economic Forum exists. So they always use this non-profit idea that they're there to help improve the state of the world, which I think is the World Economic Forum slogan. And
people, planet.
yeah, that's stakeholder capitalism.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So,
and it's all about just a talking shop. It's just about getting people together. That's all they're doing. They're facilitating. They don't have an agenda. They're just bringing people together because, they're good people. And, people need to talk. And if you can get a venue where everyone can talk and is comfortable, good things happen.
But they don't address any of the big problems, like you said. So, the problem with tax. So this World Economic Forum, its exclusive elite members are the heads of most Fortune 500 companies. Now, one of the biggest problems that we have is that a lot of these companies don't pay tax. But the World Economic Forum never addresses problems like that. It's always problems that they feel like, or the two main problems that they look at is the inclusive and sustainable. That's the two main policies of the World Economic Forum, which are the two policies of stakeholder capitalism. So once you understand that the World Economic Forum was designed specifically to transition the world to stakeholder capitalism, then it all starts to click into place. And once you understand what stakeholder capitalism is, then you go, right. And that was the aha moment for me.
We're going to come to that, right? So just for the audience, you've got right now shareholder capitalism. That's number one, right? We're going to do 1, 2, 3, 1. And that's where companies are run and governed by the people who own the shares in them. And it might be 100% owned, by family. It might be thousands of people who've put in their pension or whatever. So the company is run at, for the benefit of the shareholders. They've got a fiduciary interest to do what's best for them and make maximum profits, which has got good things and bad things. Bad things being that it's very short-term profit. They don't think long-term, and it can become quite rapacious in the sense that you just rape the earth for resources. It's all about money, and that's not great. I don't think it's great. But it's a good system nonetheless. If I've got a company, I put money into it, I've invested in it, I work hard for it, and then the profits will be divvied up by myself and all those who take part in it. It's good. The government's not telling me what to do. There's no agenda, blah, blah, blah. Then the other one is state capitalism.
Can I just add to that, though?
Interject.
So there are some problems with shareholder capitalism, and you've probably seen that yourself in the healthcare sector, where pharmaceutical companies, for example, are putting profit before people.
100%.
So there are problems with that, and the stakeholders under stakeholder capitalism, i.e. Klaus Schwab and his members, are using these problems as a
justification.
Yeah, to shift us to, or to also propagate that idea among especially the corporate sector at the moment, to think that shareholder capitalism is a bad system because it can be exploited. And don't forget, it's been exploited by the people who have created stakeholder capitalism.
Exactly.
And now they're saying, okay, now we've won shareholder capitalism. We'll come on to that a bit later with regards to the fourth industrial revolution, which is another policy or a time in our future that Klaus Schwab has an interest in. But they've essentially won capitalism at a point where a lot of that wealth shifts across to the companies who own the machines. But now they're getting close to that point. They're now saying, okay, we need a new political system that gives them control.
Yeah. So the thing is, you've got shareholder capitalism, and we talked about some of the failings. I mean, like you said, big pharma. So it's always going to be about short-term profits. But the thing is, and that's a quick return. And the thing is, science, for example, the contradiction is science doesn't do things quickly. Experiments take time, years to develop drugs properly and make sure they're working properly. So straight away, you've got a conflict there. The short-term gain and then the long-term research, they're not compatible. So something has to give. And that's just one example. And then the other thing is, number two, you've got state capitalism. And, what you've got now, for example, in China, is you've got the government dictating how the economy should be run, where the money should be spent, and blah, blah, blah. And so you've got that Soviet Marxist communist state capitalism. And it seems like they've had enough now with 1 and 2, and they want 3, which is stakeholder capitalism. And you always wonder, well, who are the stakeholders? And I'm sure you're going to share that with me, like who that is. And they make it sound like it's sustainable, it's inclusive, you've got a say in the things. But it's like, really, these multi-billion-dollar multinational companies are going to let little old me decide what to do and how the government should, how the company should run? Nah, I don't think that. But before we do that, go back to Klaus Schwab. Like, I've heard things about his background, Nazi party, this and that. What is his background? And mentor Henry Kissinger. Just for those who don't know, can you elaborate a little bit about him? Because he's an interesting fella, and he went off to China, and they did some kind of deal over there, didn't they? And I think it's just it's interesting.
Link to China. But yeah, Klaus Schwab was born in Germany. His parents, his father was a contractor to the Nazi regime, and I think he then moved to Switzerland post-war, and that's and I think that he was from memory he was taught at Harvard, and that's where he met Henry Kissinger.
Was he a professor of economics or something in Geneva or something like that?
Klaus Schwab's got about 17 doctorates.
Oh, bloody hell.
Yeah. So he's spent his entire life being educated and essentially trying to transition us to stakeholder capitalism. That's been essentially all he's been doing. Henry Kissinger is a known authoritarian, considered an authoritarian. There is lots of links to China. Klaus Schwab actually was a professor at a university in China where he became their honorary director as well there. He's very close with Xi Jinping, who is the head of the Chinese Communist Party.
He's very complimentary of him, the way he introduces him, the way he talks about it.
His Excellency, he calls him.
Yeah, Excellency, and he talks about what great things China's doing, and in the short term, I think he even favored. He said, if I was to choose between shareholder capitalism and state capitalism, it was like, choose a Chinese model. Did he say something like that?
Yeah, he so that comes on to the differences between shareholder capitalism and state capitalism. So shareholder capitalism is a system where the control lies with the shareholders. So the first word, shareholder, that implies who has control.
Yeah.
Under state capitalism, that's what they have in China. It's the state that has control. So it's quite easy to understand then, that state capitalism is an authoritarian system, where the shareholder capitalism system, the control lies with us. That means that we have the freedom to trade with the interest of generating profit. So Klaus Schwab then, in 2020, all these crazy things started to happen. The lockdowns, the rise in authority, the censorship and so forth. And then a couple of years later, Klaus Schwab released a book called Stakeholder Capitalism. And in his book and in a number of his blogs on the World Economic Forum's website, he claims that there are two existing systems. He talks about shareholder capitalism and state capitalism. And his words are, from these two systems, we need a new political system called shareholder capitalism.
Stakeholder
Capitalism. Thank you. So if state capitalism is an authoritarian system where the control shifts to the state, then obviously stakeholder capitalism is another authoritarian political system where the authority shifts to a group of stakeholders. Now, the propaganda for stakeholder capitalism is that we need this new political system that shifts authority to the stakeholders, because we need to force companies to act in the interest of a group of stakeholders rather than generating short-term profit, as you mentioned, for the shareholders. So who are the stakeholders?
Yeah.
So the stakeholders in his book, he implies that we're all stakeholders.
Oh, that sounds great.
So we need to run our companies with the interest of everyone, and not just everyone, but also the interest of the planet too, the health of the planet.
Well, that's a nice thing too.
Of course, it all sounds great. It always does.
It's all fluffy nice. I like it.
Yeah.
I'm feeling all warm inside.
Well, maybe you want stakeholder capitalism.
Maybe.
So stakeholder capitalism is a system that shifts control to a group of stakeholders, and the propaganda that's been disseminated, especially throughout the corporate sector, who are on board with this transition. These are the people in middle management jobs that work for all the corporate sector companies, the large Fortune 500 companies. They believe shareholder capitalism, that's an old system, that's broken. We need a new system because we need a system that takes care of all people and the planet. And that's the slogan of stakeholder capitalism. And hidden in a World Economic Forum blog, Klaus Schwab explains who really acquires control under stakeholder capitalism, because every person on the planet can't all have control. We can't all make decisions on policy, for example. So Klaus Schwab argues his key stakeholders will be the ones that have control. And they are the heads of most Fortune 500 companies, governments. So the members of the World Economic Forum also include the heads of all G20 countries. That's slightly changed since Trump's got in. I don't think he's a stakeholder. Again, we can come back and discuss that at the end. And then NGOs such as the World Health Organization, the UN, the EU, for example, bodies, the bodies that govern, education and so forth. So it's the heads of these organizations that will have control under stakeholder capitalism. Incidentally, they're all World Economic Forum elite members. They're exclusive members of the World Economic Forum. So essentially what this does is position the World Economic Forum as a new global government with control over all people on the planet.
That's quite scary. And, I think a lot of people have heard that we have infiltrated all the cabinets in the West. And if you look at Trudeau and this and that, and, and it's fucking terrifying. And it's true. So basically, this idea of stakeholders like you, me, everybody, it's actually a lie. Basically, it's the multi-billionaires, it's the millionaires, it's the technocrats that work for them, who are being fed by them, the hand that feeds them. All them in their cozy little club that meet together. They're actually all working for the same organization, the WEF. And if anybody doubts it, Keir Starmer was even asked, where would you rather be, Westminster or Davos? And without blinking, he goes, Davos. And it's like, what? If that's not a treasonous statement, what is? I just found that shocking. Everybody can look it up. That's why it's called the Davos man.
Yeah. Starmer's got a profile on the World Economic Forum. So does Rishi Sunak. And pretty much most of our historical prime ministers here in the UK. They've all been World Economic Forum members. And over the past 50 years, Klaus Schwab has been educating them, I'd say indoctrinating them, with his inclusive and sustainable ideas. These are the two main policies of stakeholder capitalism.
So let's talk about that now. So to basically get stakeholder capitalism in place, they're using the tools of inclusivity and sustainability. And just to recap what stakeholder capitalism means, it means that basically very powerful companies and multinationals and individuals and people and who are the government, who ultimately are not serving the people and representing the people. Basically, the government leaders are bought and paid for. They're puppets of the WEF. And
then placed into positions of power.
Yeah, that's
the penetrating the cabinets that Klaus Schwab explains.
Absolutely. It's about, I keep saying this, people are selected, not elected. You look at some of these people and you think they've not got any goddamn charisma. They can't talk without a teleprompter. Like, really can't string an authentic sentence together. They're so scripted, it's unbelievable. Outside of perhaps banking or law, they've never done anything successful or significant in the world. And you're like, why the hell are they the leader of a party? Why the hell are they the leader of a country? And they don't really demonstrate.
Why is there no one that we want to vote for?
Right.
Why are they both driving the same policies?
Exactly. I mean, the thing is, it's a running joke now about manifestos, because they promise you all this stuff leading up to an election. And then afterwards, they literally just tear it up in front of your face. And you're like, well, what was that about? And everyone goes, well, I mean, I actually hear, friends and colleagues go, oh, well, that's what they do, don't they? They never they never follow up on the manifesto. And it's like, why, as a people, have we just accepted this as a normal thing? Why is there no outrage that they blatantly lied to us? and then we just accept it as well, that's just politics, isn't it? I mean, so I think partly we're to blame as a population because we're just lazy, naive, ignorant, and stupid, and manipulated. But we need to take personal responsibility for it. And I mean, part of me says, I mean, we're jumping the gun a bit here, but part of me says, you know what? We can blame the nasty psychopaths and cronies and whatever and cabal. But as long as we, the population, humanity, remains ignorant, lazy, wanting that convenient, quick fix and safety, and not having to do any hard work or graft, we kind of deserve to be treated like this. If you act like a sheep, be prepared to be treated and slaughtered like one. I know it's harsh sounding, but
I mean, it's happened so much in the past. Good people are indoctrinated to do bad things, and even acquiescing to authority is a bad thing. People don't understand. People think, well, what can I do about it? You try to explain things to people that we need to be more active. We need to actually fight for our freedom. But people are weak. We've all discovered the human race are weak. We're easily manipulated. We're easily controlled. And
that's why I say we won't ever be able to transcend past this cyclical loop of hell until we all raise our game.
But the indoctrination this time as well is also very, very sophisticated. The technology that they use now is more sophisticated than they used during the Cultural Revolution, and the ideas are far more entrenched than they used to be.
Right.
So
I agree.
It's a belief system that they've targeted.
Mate, I've written a Substack about this. For those of you who have already heard it, I apologize, but let me just repeat it for you, and I think it'll resonate with you. And you can drink your orange juice in the process. But look, basically I said we're living in an age of inversions. It's incredibly confusing and disorientating. You just you start to question your sanity, especially when all of those around you are losing theirs. But this is deliberate. It's everything we see today is a calculated part of a much larger plan, and it is a war on our minds. And there are many wars against humanity, and multi-pronged, multi-directional, and they're spread across time. We're poisoned in the womb, at birth, throughout our lives, injections, medications, the food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink. Some poisons are visible, some are invisible. But the war on our minds is the most dangerous of all. And I said because through intense indoctrination and propaganda, behavioral manipulation, and most importantly, the use of fear, our capacity to think critically and appraise what is happening around us is totally disabled, totally switched off. So we're programmed to accept the poisons as cures, to accept slavery as a gift, to welcome our tormentors as heroes, to love our slave masters, and to become not only passive and compliant, but actually active foot soldiers for the enemy. And that's why the enemy has captured the minds and hearts of our families and our friends and our co-workers. There's a reason why it feels like we're living in a world of body snatchers, or that everyone's been assimilated into the Borg, or that, anyone around us could suddenly be turned into Agent Smith, remember, out of the Matrix. And the pandemic demonstrated how the enemy weaponized people's good nature and desire to do good against themselves and their loved ones. People took the shot because they thought they were saving the NHS and ending the pandemic. They were stopping a deadly virus. Or people's desire to look after the environment and the planet has been weaponized through the climate hoax. So now, you know what? You're going to lock yourself up. You're not going to eat beef. You're going to sit in a 15-minute ghetto because you know what? You're saving the planet. These aren't bad people doing this, but they've been tricked. Or, for example, people's tolerance and charity has been weaponized against them through the migrant invasion. Because, you're not racist after all, are you? So that was just a little bit of what I was talking about. It's about the mockery and tricks of the enemy to convert reality and truth into really evil.
And more importantly, anyone who questions the government is a dangerous right-wing conspiracy theorist. And you don't want to be one of them because they all think the world's flat. They're all completely nuts.
Yeah.
And they're dangerous. They're dangerous to our democracy. They're dangerous to our security. They're dangerous to our health. So you have to, it's okay to vilify them. It's okay to shut them out of society. And that's what we saw during the pandemic.
That's what we saw in the Cultural Revolution.
That's what we saw. But yeah, if there are one class of people that was oppressed since 2020, it was the unvaccinated. They're the true people who are oppressed over the past few years, not black people or trans people. I ask people who support these DEI policies.
Absolutely.
And I say, can you give me an example of one example of how a trans person is oppressed or a black person's oppressed? What is it that they are not allowed to do that a white man is allowed to do? and it's very difficult. Of course, there is racism in the world. Of course, that needs to be shut down, and we need to improve as a society. Of course, there is transphobia in the world, and of course, we need to improve and be less transphobic. That's a given. But the answer to these problems isn't authority, a rise in authority, and it's not making everyone oppressed.
100%. 100%. So
because that's what happens it's what happened in China. Everyone becomes oppressed. The idea that the idea of stakeholder capitalism is a world by 2030 where we all become severely oppressed to an extent that has never been seen before.
Oh, mate. So listen, I'll be honest with you, when I watched your video, I got a little bit down and a bit depressed because I was like, we need a solution to this. But let's carry on with Klaus Schwab and Henry Kissinger. Like, what's driving him? 50-year plus idea in his head. I mean, it's quite a lot. What is he getting out of this? Well, is he getting paid a shit ton of money? Is he just ideologically bought into this and wants to be the father of the one world government? And in his deluded brain, he actually thinks this is going to solve all the wars and crises. What's going on? I know it's a lot to get into his head, but you've studied him a lot. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question for a psychotherapist. But, what drives a psychopathic tyrant? That's what it is. It's control. It's power. There's something going on where they are so they've become lucky enough to be in a position somehow where they have some form of power. I mean, he's not short of money. All of the WEF members, they're all the richest people in the world.
To attend Davos, how much do you need to pay?
The government officials go there for free. They are they've been indoctrinated through the years and been placed in positions
young
of power.
global leader program, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah. They've been educated by Klaus Schwab on the Young Global Leaders program. But the heads of most Fortune 500 companies, I mean, the amount that they show on paper is insignificant to the money that they must pay, in the back door.
So it's millions.
Yeah. So, the world, Klaus Schwab himself is a multi-millionaire, if not billionaire. He's a very wealthy person. So it's not money that drives him. It's power and control. So
where does that fit in then with, for example, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers? Because I've had Jacob Nordengard on. He talks about the Rockefellers. There's people who say it's the Rothschilds. People say it's these other families. Are they all happy with what Klaus Schwab is doing? Because ultimately it benefits them, because ultimately, true democracy is a bit messy and sticky, and they have to work hard at it and fund sides and lobbyists and, and actually just simply having this new control system in place, it's great for them because they consolidate their power and their money and subjugate the rest of humanity. And they're one of the key stakeholders. Is that how it fits in?
Well, the families, they're always operating in the shadows. They're not in the forefront like the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. And I think the genius of Klaus Schwab's plan, and he is an evil genius, is Klaus Schwab, is that it's all done in the open, and it's done in a way to make us want to get on board with that transition to stakeholder capitalism. So, as I mentioned before, how do you get an entire population to adopt communism or an authoritarian system? Because 1 billion people in China will only accept, their authoritarian rules if they want it. If they don't want it, if they reject it, they can all just rise up and push back and remove the government. So the key factor in an authoritarian system is indoctrination.
Yeah.
So Klaus Schwab is essentially using similar Marxist or cultural Marxism ideas, Maoism. I expect in the future we'll look back at this time and call it Schwabism, because he's taken Mao's concept and evolved it to include sustainability and shifted inclusive ideas to target, there was feminism, and now it's black and trans people and so forth. So yeah, it's all about manipulation to get us to want this new system. But so I guess the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. I mean, these are they've been a very influential force for many decades prior to this, and the monarchies and so forth. But they're operating in the shadows. So the difference then is Klaus Schwab is doing everything in the open. But I imagine that he represents the interests of all these very powerful elites, the monarchies and so forth, that are operating in the shadows. He's just doing it in the forefront.
It's all about control. It's all about control. They've got all the money in the world. Now it's about consolidating it so that nothing will ever threaten what they've got and take away. And they just want more of it. So,
and may I add, Klaus Schwab has failed for the past 50 years.
Failed.
He hasn't enacted stakeholder capitalism. They've tried several times. They've tried several pandemics. They've tried global warming. They've tried inclusive ideas many times and failed. And in fact, in 2020, when he enacted the Great Reset of Capitalism, which is the name of the 10-year transition to stakeholder capitalism, King Charles, at the time he was Prince Charles, gave a speech, and that's featured in my second episode of the documentary series called Stakeholder Capitalism. He gave a speech where he's always referencing throughout the speech about the transition to stakeholder capitalism, but he changes a few words. So he'd say that finally, we can see that this is going to happen. Finally, after 50 years of trying, we can see this happening. And he talks about it being to a sustainable market. And he'll use in the interest of people and planet, which is the slogan of stakeholder capitalism. So they're all propagating these ideas, but by changing a few words, he disassociates it from stakeholder capitalism to just, okay, we're doing this transition in the economy to make the world more, sustainable.
It's all BS. And they do use slogans. I think it's part of the mind manipulation and indoctrination, build back better. And all the global leaders are all parroting the same line everywhere. Whole world society, that's another thing that just keeps getting banded around again and again. And then, like you said, people, planet, again, it gets, but listen.
Agenda 2030, which is, again, that's, that has all of the policies of stakeholder capitalism, and the United Nations, which, is driving that, that campaign, the Agenda 2030. They're partners of the World Economic Forum. Antonio Guterres is a World Economic Forum stakeholder. I might add as well, Xi Jinping is a stakeholder who now has control over the West under stakeholder capitalism. So does Putin. They're all in the same club, and they're all so they have to shift us from free market capitalism from 2020, the illusion of free market capitalism, to us all wanting stakeholder capitalism by 2030. And that's not an easy journey. So they use crises, and the idea really is to disrupt our society, break us, to get us into a position where we become weak and accept it. And I'll come on to why 2020 was the year when they're successful in enacting stakeholder capitalism in a while. And again, that comes back to the fourth industrial revolution, but let's talk about it.
So 100%. But the thing is, all these people, I think they're all actors. They're all, we get this idea that, there's one country that's free, Russia's a free place, and they're all, he's a young global leader. Some people say, oh, but he's shaken off. He went inside, he found out what it's all about, and he rejected it. That's why they're attacking Russia.
If there is such a thing as controlled opposition, then it's Russia. It's Putin.
Yeah, because from my understanding, everything they're doing, including at their BRICS meeting, it's all pushing the same UN agenda. It's the same language they're using. It's no different.
I heard Putin promoting the Democrats in the lead up to their election too. So, which they're all doing. All the stakeholders were promoting the Democrats because they needed the Democrats in there to drive stakeholder capitalism in the US.
So basically, when it comes to crises, what I'm worried about is the way they enact massive change is, for them, every crisis is an opportunity. And they talk about it openly. So a pandemic is an opportunity. A war is an opportunity. A global war is an even bigger opportunity. And looking back
to
now...
build back better.
Yeah. So what I look back at now is even World War One and World War Two, they're completely manufactured and engineered. They always knew who was going to win. There was always a plan, and you just need to look at the fact that the US and the UK were funding communism, supporting them, and say you're like, what? I mean, that should be the complete opposite to what you believe in. Why would you be supporting, the Communist Party? But now I'm worried that they've used pandemics to enact some change and the global crisis, climate change, so-called climate change. But I'm worried that they're like, right, what else can we do? What's really scary? And then let's get this idea of a global war and, mass terrorism, false flag events, something. Even what's going on in Gaza and Palestine and Israel might be used. They might say, oh, look, see, Israel has failed, it's killing people, genocide. I mean, I'm saying that flipping it the opposite way around, to say, look, you know what? We need a global government to control everything, to stop people fighting amongst each other. Because if you're all part of one government, there's no fighting anymore. We're all one big happy family.
And they
feel
can
like
react
they're going
more quickly to things like pandemics and work together. And they use reasons why it all has to be consolidated to this centralized power.
And it might be a hack. It might be a digital hack. Oh, the currencies have all gone, or we've been, we can't trust our digital system anymore. We need to bring in a new system. They will be the ones who engineer the crisis and the problem, and then they'll come up with the solution. It won't be our solution. It'll be their solution. And because of what we've gone through, because of the stress and the hassle and the mind rape, we'll be like, okay, right, please, thank you so much.
Exactly. I'll come back to the full plan for the Great Reset plan in a bit, but let's maybe talk about the inclusive and sustainable ideas.
Please do. That's very important. Yeah. Let's talk about that.
So we've explained that stakeholder capitalism is a new global political system that shifts authority away from the shareholders and the state in the two regions, in the East and the West, to a group of stakeholders who are the World Economic Forum's elite members. They have authority under this new global political system. So that's the technical explanation, that maybe someone who's done an MBA would learn. But the two policies of stakeholder capitalism that differentiate stakeholder capitalism from existing systems are its inclusive and sustainable policies. And we've mentioned that inclusive policies are based upon the idea that a subset of our community are oppressed and that we need a new, more inclusive system to make people more inclusive, to remove the oppression. And that oppression is caused by shareholder capitalism. So it's a judicial system that's unfair to black people and so forth. That's they're using ideas like that to make us angry with shareholder capitalism and make us want a more inclusive system, which is stakeholder capitalism. So we've and actually let's go into that a bit more. So how are they doing that? So let's look at the trans thing's really interesting, because most people can turn around and say, that's a bit weird that these biological men are taking part in female sports and are using female spaces. So what they're doing there is that they've come up with this concept to say that you can be born in the wrong body.
Yeah.
But if you think about that in itself, what does that actually mean? It means that you knew what gender you are before you were born. And that when you were born, you would actually realise that you've been born in the wrong body. So, I mean, it's just ludicrous. There's no science to it. It's quite funny.
It is ludicrous, mate.
So, and then
But that's the whole point, that they will tell you to believe something that's ludicrous.
Exactly.
And that's part of the process to break you. And if you resist, then they will make life so difficult for you and painful for you, so that in the end, the compliance is to say, yeah, I believe the nonsense. That's the win they've got against you. They've made you accept something that's ridiculous. And they did that in the Soviet communist era, didn't they?
I don't know too much about.
Like you believe that the leader is still alive. He's dead, literally cold dead in front of you. But, they're telling you, look how healthy he is.
Yeah.
And you have to accept, the leader is healthy and alive. Yeah. It's like...
Yeah, it's all manipulation. So trans people, who I'm sure many are going through a confusing time anyway, trying to understand whether they're male or female and what are these feelings that they have. being told that you've actually been born in the wrong body and you actually are female, that's good to hear for them. It makes them feel like, okay, well, I'm not bad. I'm not going crazy. And because you really are female, you should be able to use female only spaces, and you should be able to take part in female only sports because you are female. And this is the interesting part, anyone who tells you otherwise, well, they are the oppressor.
They're the bad person.
They're the bad person. That is evidence. When you see J.K. Rowling saying you shouldn't be doing that, clear evidence that you're oppressed and she is the oppressor. And
man, I lost my job because of that. I'm the oppressor. That apparently there's 5 anonymous complaints about my tweets because I'm transphobic. I was referred to the GMC. They said there's nothing to see here. Yeah, we've got concerns about him being a conspiracy theorist and anti-vaxxer. But why don't you explore your local hospital policy guidelines and see if you can deal with him? But the thing is, like, I actually believe that the trans community and the people who fall into it are victims who are being exploited and manipulated and abused by this stakeholder capitalism business, because they're weaponizing their confusion, hurt, their psychological problems. Many of them are gay, just don't know it yet. And instead of saying, oh, actually, the reason why you don't fancy a girl is because you fancy boys, they're saying, oh, it's because you're not a guy, you're a woman, you're trapped in a woman's body. So then you undergo surgery and drugs that basically strip you away of any ability to have sexual pleasure, any reproduction capacity.
irreversible.
It's irreversible. It's experimental in many cases. And then when they come out of it, they're still fundamentally unhappy because, of course, the problem hasn't, this treatment hasn't fixed their underlying problem, whatever it might be. So then they get even more disillusioned and depressed. And it's also a big industry. There's money being made out of it. So I just feel like the trans group are an exploited group of individuals being harvested and used by, these WEF people. And when you stick up for them, the funny thing is, rather than being an oppressor, you are trying to defend them and look after them and protect them from being exploited. The WFE crowd turn around to you and go, you're an oppressor, you're transphobic. It's again the complete inversion of reality. So they abuse these people, they experiment on them, they ruin their lives. They're the good guys. Us calling out the bullshit and trying to protect these people from irreversible harm, we're now the oppressors.
Exactly, yeah.
Figure that shit out.
And you can see that it's such an important part of the agenda, this inclusive policy, that all the big stakeholders are pushing it hard. So all the big Fortune 500 companies, all the governments and so forth.
All the private hospitals.
Yeah, they're all pushing it. You have to get on board with this. And if you don't, like, just what happened to you? You lose your job. You're censored. You're cancelled. You're a
villain.
You're vilified.
So that's the inclusivity, right? You got the black, promoting the black and the ethnicity. If you look at all the adverts, it's always a black guy and a white woman. Have you noticed that now?
Yeah. Well, we'll come on to the ESG component in a minute, because there is a credit score for companies that force companies now to be more inclusive and sustainable. And we'll come back onto that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So you're actually punished, and actually you'll probably lose your business if you don't comply to these ideas.
And so this is a way of basically, again, taking away that whole shareholder capitalism. Shareholders are beholden to no one. They do what they want. But now through government regulations and laws, banking, finance, because of how banks will finance you, their autonomy has now been removed. The company's autonomy has been removed. They have to follow these diktats and orders and trends by the banking industry and whatnot and the government regulations. Because if they don't, then they lose money, they lose funding streams, and they'll go out of business.
Exactly.
And so, already what I'm trying to say is they've taken shareholder capitalism and it's already being morphed into the stakeholder business. And I don't know if shareholders even know about this.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can see that stakeholder capitalism has already been embedded within our economy and society, because the two solutions, so the solution for this inclusive problem, in inverted commas, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So these are the policies that are being pushed onto companies for them to adopt. And diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI, what that does is it forces companies to employ more people of diversity. And the only way you can do that is to discriminate. You discriminate against the oppressor, and you give more opportunities to the oppressed.
How does it feel like being an oppressor? What does it feel like for you personally being an oppressor? Are you a nice one? Are you a reluctant? Are you a reluctant oppressor?
I don't know what to say to this, because if I make a joke out of it, I know someone's going to take this and use it against me at some point.
I'd love to hear your joke, Mr. Oppressor.
Yeah, no, these days being a white man, I don't think gives you an advantage, or it's just not a fair system these days, because you're looking for jobs and so forth. Then, if you're a person of diversity, then under these new diversity, equity, inclusion policies, then you're given a leg up, essentially.
Well, I can tell you this, because I hear this every single freaking day. So I've got one of my daughter's school fellow parents' dad. I chat to him at the school gate, and he tells me he used to be in camera work, and specifically transferring files, a special skill he's got. I can't remember. It's very technical. And he said he was very, very good at it. Very good. One of the best in the industry. And he goes, but in the last few years, I can't get any work. And he goes, I go, why? He goes, truthfully, they go, like, you know what? You're not what we're looking for. And he goes, what do you mean by that? He goes, we've been, exactly. The quota is we need 50% to be women. We need 35-40% to be black, Asian, or ethnic minority. Then we need trans. And he goes, like, the quota's like 5-10% for people like me, straight white guy at my age. And he goes, like, I get fucked. So I get discriminated against because they want to give it to the other people. And he goes, look, I'm not racist. I'm not sexist. Like, I want these people to not be disadvantaged. But the reality is, I'm the one being disadvantaged. I'm the one being discriminated against. And I was like, well, actually, I believe in meritocracy. I think the best person, regardless of their gender and their color and their ethnicity and their religion and their age, should get the job. Like, that's as simple as that. It's not hard.
And also, free market capitalism gives the freedom to the shareholders to employ the best people that they want to run their company. And
because obviously they're always going to pick the best person, because if it means picking the best person, they'll maximize profits. If they're picking someone like the oppressor, another white guy who's not very good and stupid, I mean, how's that good for business? They're going to ultimately pick whoever is the best person for the job. I think. Anyway, maybe I'm naive. Some people will be like, oh, you don't know how racism works. No, but genuinely, ultimately, you need to stop looking at color. If you want to be, if you want equality in that regard, don't see color, don't see gender, just see people for who they are and what they bring to the table. But anyway, this guy's being punished because he's white. And you know how many stories I've heard like that? So many. I just need to get down to my jiu-jitsu club, and all the kids are like complaining about it. They can't get jobs. They can't get an interview because they're straight and white. They're screwed.
Well, they're trying to address discrimination with discrimination, which is not the way that you can't address discrimination. With that.
You sound like a typical oppressor. Yeah. Anyway, so move on. So we've talked about that.
But you can see that diversity, equity, inclusion is a stakeholder capitalism policy. So that's already been embedded into companies. So it already exists. You can already see it happening in the economy and society. And that's the solution. So by saying that there is a subset of the community are oppressed and that we need a new political system that's more inclusive, we can solve that problem. Okay, all you people who are oppressed, and it's not just the people who are allegedly oppressed. It's everyone who have been indoctrinated in education or universities and so forth, that have been indoctrinated with these ideas, that are out there campaigning for a more inclusive system. So the idea is to present stakeholder capitalism as the solution, because we've got these diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. And I think this is maybe a good time to address Black Lives Matter, because that's another inclusive organization, just like the Red Guards during the Cultural Revolution, which was their social justice movement that people joined to to rise up and overturn capitalism in favor of communism, to drive that shift from the bottom up. The same ideas were propagated by Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, the two co-founders, who are they? They're women, aren't they?
Yeah, one of them is Alicia Garza, who was educated, incidentally, by Klaus Schwab on his Young Global Leaders program. She's a young global leader.
Frack.
And then her co-founder proclaimed that they are both trained Marxists.
I heard that.
She said it on video in an interview. So that's an organization where that was encouraging people to join their movement and go out there and drive the shift from the bottom up to a more inclusive system, i.e. stakeholder capitalism. That's what all the defund the police were about. That's what all the riots were about, attacking businesses and trying to overturn capitalism in favor of stakeholder capitalism.
Defund the police. Anyway, let's move away from inclusivity. I think we've got the gist of that. It's all just BS. It's diversity, superficial diversity, but not, and especially not of thought, though. Okay, you cannot have diversity of thought. Isn't that interesting? They promote diversity, but you not the wrong think.
Yeah, you're transphobic.
It has to be.
You're racist unless you toe the line.
It has to be groupthink. Groupthink, not wrong think. What about sustainability? So this is really, they're pushing this climate agenda, the planet's warming, net zero. Is that not sustainability?
Well, inclusive, there's a lot of people pushing back on the inclusive stuff.
Okay, good.
There's a lot of people already thinking or saying that this is wrong, but the sustainable part, that's the part that scares me the most.
All right, well, let's talk about that. Why are you worried about sustainability? Don't you love the planet? Now, not only are you a white oppressor, you're a planet killer as well. How do you sleep at night?
Yeah. Well, actually, I love the planet. I love being in nature. I got my camper van. I respect the environment. And a lot of people do too. But the idea that the World Economic Forum are propagating with their sustainable ideas is that climate change poses an existential threat. And unless and that's being caused, of course, by shareholder capitalism, free market capitalism. That's always the problem. And we need a new political system that's more sustainable. And that's to save the planet. And if we don't change everything about our society and our economy by 2030, which also incidentally is the time when we reach full stakeholder capitalism, then we all perish because the planet will be inhabitable.
It's ridiculous. You know what? The inversion is the same rapacious, greedy corporations that have created the most damage environmentally are the same ones now jumping ship from that world into stakeholder capitalism and pointing the finger of blame, not at themselves because they're at fault for pushing this rapacious, parasitical, consumerist agenda. They're now pointing at us poor plebs and saying it's our fault. You shouldn't have consumed so much. You shouldn't have been so wasteful. You shouldn't have populated yourselves. You now need to live in more austere times with less things and own nothing and basically adopt this new economy that's going to come about. You rent everything, everything's subscription model. And that's how we save the planet, by taking away your freedoms and reducing your quality of life. That's how we fix it. Not the fact that we, the companies, are at fault and we're still now going to be profiting from your misery. And they're still going to be polluting afterwards as well. That's the funny thing. Nothing will change.
Yeah. So the idea with sustainable, or what's causing the existential threat with climate change is us emitting carbon.
I know, it's terrible.
So
can you stop breathing, please?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's one thing. And of course the electricity. There'll be no more podcasts, no more heating. So everything we do emits carbon. A lot of things are powered by some form of fossil fuel at the moment. It's going to be almost impossible to switch to a renewable energy source, permanently. And they know that. They know that, and that's all part of that tyranny. So shareholder capitalism is causing climate change, which is posing an existential threat. And unless we change everything about everything that we do by 2030, we will die, is essentially the idea that they're propagating. And
Greta, their little wee spokesperson.
Yeah, she's a World Economic Forum stakeholder. She's
How do I get to be one? Sounds like a good gig.
Yeah, well,
private jets, Davos, world speaking tours, good paycheck.
Well, it's two things. Either you become a tyrant of theirs, and you could do in your position as a podcaster and with influence. They want influencers because the whole point of their organization is to propagate ideas, and you'll be well positioned for that if you wanted to become a stakeholder. Or you can be indoctrinated. You can be a member of the World Economic Forum. So recently I did an interview with Thierry Malaret, who is a World Economic Forum member. He's been indoctrinated by Klaus Schwab's inclusive and sustainable ideas for many years, and he led the Global Risk Network. So he was a prominent member of the World Economic Forum, but he wasn't important enough to become a stakeholder, someone who acquires control under this new system. So, Thierry,
so you can be members, and there's a specific category where you're now a stakeholder. You get a special different badge.
Yeah, the stakeholders are the people, generally the positions of power. The politicians, the people who run the large companies or run the NGOs like the UN. The EU,
what happens when you retire from that position? Do you still hold on to the stakeholder, or do you get downgraded?
I don't know that, but they're probably well looked after for their efforts in transitioning us, because they're all the mission for every single stakeholder is to transition us to stakeholder capitalism. So,
okay, go back to Thierry.
So Thierry is somebody who is just a normal member who was indoctrinated with these inclusive and sustainable ideas. These are the two ideas that are the biggest problems in the world, right? Forget about everything else. These are the two biggest problems in the world, according to the World Economic Forum, and their members are indoctrinated through the Young Global Leaders and other events and things that they have going on there to essentially become ambassadors for stakeholder capitalism. So Thierry was someone who is an author and an economist, and Klaus Schwab clearly saw that Thierry was indoctrinated with these ideas, and he was an author, and then reached out to Thierry to write the Fourth Industrial Revolution book that's infamous, The Great Reset, which is called COVID-19, The Great Reset book, that was co-authored with Klaus Schwab. And then the third book was The Great Narrative. So,
so he's in there deep.
He's in there. He actually left the World Economic Forum. He hasn't been working there for 15 years. He's just been used as an author to propagate Klaus Schwab's ideas. So Klaus Schwab, or he claims that Klaus Schwab got in touch with him to write a book once the pandemic was taking place, and Klaus Schwab is essentially saying the biggest threats, the biggest problems as a result of this pandemic are X, Y, and Z. All of these same policies that we see now being pushed for stakeholder capitalism, which is the inclusive and sustainable ideas. So, and Thierry said that, yeah, he agrees these are going to be the biggest problems as a result of the pandemic, and that's why he wrote COVID-19, The Great Reset with him. So he's been manipulated. I interviewed him. I showed him the evidence. I showed him a completely different narrative from the one that Klaus Schwab had propagated, and I think he was very much taken back by it. So I do hope to have a second interview with him to discuss this further, but essentially presented everything. So
I'll put the link of that talk in the show notes. I've watched half of it, and it's a bit of an eye-opener.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how he reacts to it. And I was always very polite, of course, but I didn't go in hard. I just was very gentle, and I just showed him the evidence. And at the beginning, he started off, essentially saying that I was a conspiracy theorist, and then he was squirming a bit at the end, trying to have no association at all to the World Economic Forum, stakeholder capitalism, or any of these policies. So that was quite an interesting interview.
So tell me, you said sustainability is the big worry. Like, why?
Because the ideas are heavily propagated and they're indoctrinated they're embedded quite severely into a lot of people, much more than inclusive and sustainable, inclusive ideas. So I've got family members, I've got angel investors in my business. They're all heavily indoctrinated by the sustainable ideas. So they've seen my film. The evidence is irrefutable that we are being transitioned to this global authoritarian political system called stakeholder capitalism. When asked that question, the most indoctrinated will not answer it. They just go quiet. They can't answer it. They don't say anything. And then eventually they do say it. They do have to admit, yeah, we're transitioning to stakeholder capitalism, because that is absolutely clear in the film, because it's Klaus Schwab and his stakeholders who are telling us there's no opinion from me in this film. I needed to ensure that the evidence was irrefutable, and this was all conveyed by the World Economic Forum stakeholders to protect my credibility, because I have a tech company. So the first part is to recognize that, yeah, that is happening. Most people recognize that is happening after watching my film. And then the second question I ask is, are you happy that this transition is happening undemocratically and discreetly? And they don't answer that. They stop, because, yeah, I mean, it's none of us have voted for this transition, so it's undemocratic. Most people are unaware of it, so it's happening discreetly. So that in itself, I mean, it's just two questions, and if you want to win an argument with someone who's heavily indoctrinated about whether or not we are, this rise in authority is not for our benefit, then show them the film, ask them those two questions. But the sustainable ideas, I don't even go into the science, not even in the film, in the first episode, because those ideas are so entrenched. It's a very difficult.
So how do you crack through to your friends and family? They've seen the video documentary, and what they haven't gone, oh my God, this is just terrible. They've just gone quiet. That's it.
A lot of people can't accept that it's a bad thing. So.
Or maybe they just can't accept they've been duped. Yeah,
but also the ideas, the indoctrination, not just the sustainable ideas, but the indoctrination to believe that this is a dangerous right-wing conspiracy theory is so entrenched that they can't, evidence, it's their belief system.
Do you know what? You've just done that. Exactly. The problem is the hardest thing to change is a belief system, especially when it takes on the trappings of a religion. So a lot of these people now have fallen for the cult of sustainability. They've fallen for this idea the planet's dying. And I think you're right. There's a bit of rejection to the inclusivity thing, because it's deemed as woke and just complete madness, anti-family, anti-God, anti-religion. And a lot of people are now pushing back and going, what the hell is this all about? And actually, even that pushback, I think, serves the WEF, because it ferments conflict, division, distraction. So they love all that sideshow. The one that's not getting much pushback is the sustainability thing. Everybody kind of admits that, the planet's dying. I mean, even RFK Jr., like, he talks about, oh yeah, there's a green problem and there's an environmental problem. And, like, what I'm saying is, I'm sure about that. A lot of prominent people still fall for the narrative that carbon is a problem, the planet is dying, climate change is real. And, questioning that you are planet killer, you're a bad person, so you're far right.
The way that I manage that is that
also, I'm sorry, one more thing. This idea of overpopulation is heavily embedded in a lot of people. A lot of good people, religious people, genuinely believe there's too many people on the planet, and that we, human beings, are a parasite. Now, I've got a very different take on it. I think, human beings, and especially children, are a gift from God, and the more of us, the better. And actually, far from being parasites, we're beautiful. We're part of this earth, this ecosystem. But a lot of people have now gone down that narrative. There's too many people. There needs to be less of us. And again, that kind of suits the agenda of those who want to be in charge, the eugenicists, the philanthropists, the depopulation people. So it's kind of scary, actually. And I've had the same problem. I find it very difficult to crack that nut.
So I don't argue the science, because that's too entrenched, and it's a very difficult, because it's all scientific papers and so forth.
But data doesn't cut through belief systems, mate.
Exactly. So what I do is just jump to the solution. I ask people, well, what's the solution to this? What do you think the solution to this is? And so, to get them thinking, and eventually I will explain or ask what the solution that's being provided by the government. And by the way, the solution is global, right? This isn't a policy that's being implemented here in the UK or just in the US. It's a global policy. It's centralized. And that solution is net zero. Right? It's not a policy that Starmer or Sunak or anyone like that came up with. It was created by Klaus Schwab. He's very open. He explains that quite openly in this film. So the net zero solution, the zero part of that means no carbon emissions, no more oil to power anything by 2030. So what does that mean? Like what we just said, that means no more electricity that's powered by fossil fuels. There's no more cars. There's no more traveling by plane. So my question to them is, so are you aware of what this solution is that's being proposed? It's called net zero. Of course, they've heard of net zero. Everyone's heard of net zero around the world. This is a global policy. And so I say to them, the zero part of this means no more going on holiday again. How do you feel about never going on holiday ever again? Or owning a diesel vehicle? I'll talk a little bit more, the fourth industrial revolution a bit later, which means that it's going to be very difficult for people to buy electric vehicles. But the solution is a complete restriction on pretty much every aspect of your life. So mostly travel, but they're also targeting meat as well. So no more eating meat. And again, that's related to the fourth industrial revolution. So I'll kick that further down there.
Yeah, no, I'd like you to talk about that as well. But carry on.
So the zero part is zero emissions by 2030. And the net part of that means that you can travel by plane, you can travel by car, you can eat meat. Maybe, I don't know the ins and outs on that, if you pay a carbon tax. So it's called offsetting your carbon emissions. So this is a policy that targets the poor and allows the rich to continue to live more freely. It's not living freely, but you'll get more access to, for example, in Davos, they're all flying in with their jumbo jets, right, every year. And that's creating more pollution just in one day than weeks.
350,000 cars.
Yeah, you saw the data. But they justify this because they're saying that they're offsetting their carbon emissions. So they pay a tax. And with that tax, someone takes that money and plants some trees in another part of the world, which then soaks up the carbon, they say. So you're offsetting it. So you can emit carbon as long as you offset it.
I wonder how much money people are making with this carbon trading business.
And the greenwashing that's happening.
The greenwashing.
Yeah. So that's the idea, to enable them, the stakeholders who have the money, who have most of the money in the fourth industrial revolution in the future, and will restrict most of us who will be poor in the fourth industrial revolution to not be able to travel. And when I say not be able to travel, this is like a permanent lockdown. So maybe there's a bit more we can talk about what 2030 looks like near the end. But essentially, Klaus Schwab has designed these 15-minute cities with everything we need. So we don't need to travel. So that will enable the poor to have everything you need. You can go to the park. You've got your green spaces. There'll be less roads, no cars in the city. And then have everything you need, all your shops. Things will be delivered by drone. So you don't need to go anywhere. So Klaus Schwab has got a full plan for this by 2030, what the world will look like.
It's fucking terrifying.
It is terrifying.
What happens if I just want to get in a car and just drive? That's freedom for me.
Yeah, you'd need to, possibly petrol and diesel cars will be banned by then. But even electric vehicles, you'll still need to pay a carbon tax.
Have you seen that movie with Justin Timberlake where you've got run out of time? Basically, you get credits for putting in work. And if you want to get out of your zone, you have to pay more credits and it eats up your life.
Oh, I haven't. Should watch that.
Yeah. I've forgotten what it's called.
They're creating lots of things.
So and you get past these like zones and they get more and more affluent as you get in. But to live in those affluent zones, you need more and more money.
Yeah.
So only the really affluent can live what looks like today's world. And the further out you go, the more poor you are. I mean, it's just ghettos. And I've got a feeling that we're all going to be corralled into these ghettos and live like fucking animals.
Sold us smart cities, sold us 15-minute cities.
Yeah, but they're just digital prisons, just prisons.
Exactly.
And, you know, the rich will have parklands, they'll have stately homes, they'll have counties for their own back garden. And the rest of us, by the millions, will be shoved into these tiny little spaces. And we won't know any better because we can't get out, we can't see, we can't look out, we can't travel. It's very dystopian.
The affluent will be living out in the suburbs where the people who are unemployed, living off universal basic income, and again, we'll come on to that, that's all part of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, will be confined to living within these 15-minute cities where there'll be surveillance, a credit score, pretty much like China at the moment, how that works.
Will the rich be subjected to credit scores and surveillance?
Everyone will. But this really is an idea to let the stakeholders travel more freely and just have no restrictions on their lives. Again, I come on to the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Can I quickly tell you something? Do you know what it means like to travel unrestricted and not have any problems?
What do you mean?
All right. So what is it like when you get on a plane and go somewhere? What do you have to go through? What's the process like?
Yeah.
The security, and how do you find all that? Taking off your belt, shoes, you know, hours. How many hours do you have to be at the airport beforehand? Quite a few, don't you?
Yeah.
Do you like it?
I don't think anyone likes that, no.
So I have a listener, supporter, who was like, dude, I love your work. Come out and spend 2 days with me for the weekend. I want to show you something. I went, all right, cool. So I said, okay, I'll buy these cheap EasyJet tickets because, you know, I don't have that much money. He went, no, it's all right. I'll leave it. I'll organize everything. Like, where'd you live? Where's the nearest airports and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, eventually what happened was I got a limo, picked me up from my driveway, took me to Northolt RAF base. I went to a little box. There's an army officer there. He said, can I have your passport? Gave him a passport. Right. Dr. Malik? I went, yes. Can you please get in that car? Got in the car. Went straight onto this private plane on the tarmac. No one checked for any tickets. No one did a security check. No one asked for my water or anything. The pilot and his co-pilot greeted me. They took my luggage, put it in the hold. Didn't ask what was in my luggage. I got on the plane and I flew directly to this place. And he, by the way, my supporter said, I want you to experience this so that one day you can say it on the podcast and people can hear how the other people travel, the people that are trying to control you, what their life is like. And then I get off the plane. I walk up to this office. There's no queue, nothing, just me. I hand over my passport. She went, thank you so much, Dr. Matt. Hope you had a nice flight. Stamp. And then I'm out literally on the doorstep in a different city in a different country. The whole thing took me like 2 hours. If that was like Heathrow Airport, blah, 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 it would have been like 5-6 hours, grueling, waiting. It was insane. It was insane. And I was like, and he goes, this is how they travel. No one checks anything. No one's asking them. There's no humiliation. You go, you understand. None of that is required. They do that deliberately to sap your energy and drain your life force. All of this about terrorism and all that kind of, it's all garbage. I'd feel that in. That's how Klaus Schwab travels, by the way, and all the other rich people. It's insane. Well, the difference.
In the Fourth Industrial Revolution, it will obliviate the middle class. So
it already is.
That money just shifts to a very small number of people. So
let's talk about the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Let's also finish sustainable.
Okay.
I know, because that's a really exciting part of it.
I'm just worried because you've got half an hour. So
okay. Yeah, I guess.
Go. Finish off the sustainability.
Maybe we can talk about meat.
Okay.
That's quite an interesting topic with regards to sustainability. Actually, no. Let's go on to the Fourth Industrial Revolution because I can address that in that part. But maybe I'll just explain a little bit about my background and why I know all this and why I have an interest in it.
Yeah, because you're a TV producer. That's what I remember that right at the beginning. I asked you, are you just some security intel person? Like, what's your background?
Yeah. I worked in TV. I worked at ITV. I was a producer. And then I left there and became freelance as a director of photography. I worked on Panorama, Watchdog, a lot of the flagship documentary series for the BBC, which I used to really, take a lot of pride about. Not so much anymore when I've started to see all the propaganda coming from the BBC. But I left the industry and I became a tech entrepreneur.
When was that?
So probably about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, yeah. So, and I created a tech platform that's designed to solve problems primarily in the industry in which I worked, which was the TV industry. So it was a platform that's designed for freelancers. And what I discovered was that the World Economic Forum were producing a lot of reports and creating a lot of initiatives around the future of work. They called it the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So I was very interested in what they were doing, so that I can create a platform that is designed for the future of work. So it's future-proofed.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the pandemic happened, I became very interested in what was happening at the World Economic Forum. A lot of the, now I know who are, they call themselves the stakeholders, were, and Klaus Schwab in particular, were creating reports in 2020 that forecast 50% of our jobs will be lost to AI by 2025. And recently they've postponed that to 42% of our jobs will be lost to artificial intelligence by 2027. The exact words that they use is will need reskilling. So 42% of us by 2027 will need reskilling. And that is due to disruption by artificial intelligence and automation.
You can see it in the checkout in supermarket.
You can see, the finance industry will be disrupted by technology because machines process data better than people. You can see it with automated cars driving around Los Angeles will disrupt the transport industry completely.
Doctors. AI will just do consultations.
Education. So why indoctrinate teachers to then indoctrinate the kids when kids can be at home using AI, learning technology and indoctrinate the kids directly? There's no need for teachers. And again, I'll come back onto the finance part of this because they're not even going to be able to afford to pay teachers. The government's not going to have any money. It's going to be broke in the future. So, or not so much broke, it would just be funded from a different source. So all these weird things were happening. And then Klaus Schwab created this campaign called the Great Reset of Capitalism. So we got this rising authority. And now this organization comprising of the most powerful people in the world are driving a campaign called the Great Reset of Capitalism. And you've got some very influential people all parroting the Great Reset. The Great Reset. You may have seen the
I've seen it.
reels. Yeah,
One politician after another.
Exactly.
Very spooky and eerie.
So I then came back and I contacted a friend that used to work at ITV and said, something strange happening over here in the World Economic Forum. Would you like to make a short film just to show people? Because 2020, the vaccine was about to be rolled out and I'm very concerned. I wanted to make my friends and family aware. I wanted to let people know that there's something happening. There's a change happening, this rise in authority, this great reset of capitalism happening. And then they brought out a slogan for the Great Reset called Build Back Better.
666.
Is that right? So, but Build Back Better is the slogan for the Great Reset to get us on board with the Great Reset. So a friend of mine came up and we made, actually I'll give him a shout out because he did all this hard work for free. He's never been paid for it, neither have I. We made The New Normal. His name's Steve Milton. And so we worked hard and made this film called The New Normal. It went very viral. But I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I was quite worried and some strange things started to happen to me. I was like, my phone was getting hacked and I was just very anxious about, am I exposing something that's really big here? And what's the consequences of this? But after that, I was involved in some activism and then I went away for a while and really started to think about what was going on there. How does all this relate? What's this fourth industrial revolution? What is the Great Reset? How does all that relate to the big picture? And then, of course, the Stakeholder Capitalism book was released by Klaus Schwab. And then I just slowly pieced it all together. So the fourth industrial revolution is a period in our future when artificial intelligence takes our jobs. And I mentioned the projections by the World Economic Forum that it's very severe. And there's no evidence that there's going to be enough new jobs to reskill half of the workforce into. And then the World Economic Forum started to associate the Great Reset with the fourth industrial revolution. They started to create content that was called the Great Reset, harnessing the fourth industrial revolution. And then they created another initiative called the Jobs Reset. So there was a huge jobs element to this. And this was featured in the new normal in 2020, which you can see on my platform called yellow.forum. And so how does the jobs relate to all this? Well, as I mentioned, in the future, AI will inevitably take jobs because AI will continue to advance and get smarter and smarter and become better at us, than most, at most jobs. And I like to use the analogy of a 50-year-old truck driver. And actually, I think I got this from Yuval Noah Harari, who is Klaus Schwab's advisor. And he's a historian and a futurist. And he advises Klaus Schwab about the fourth industrial revolution. And he explains how a 50-year-old truck driver, it's going to be very difficult for him to retrain into a job of tomorrow, into the future of work, which is, technology based. So a software engineer, for example. And you'll hear Thierry Malaret in the interview talk about, people can become drone operators and there'll be some new jobs, but there's no evidence that there's going to be enough new jobs. And how does a 50-year-old truck driver retrain to become a software engineer? It's going to be a very difficult thing to do. So you've got this period in our future called the fourth industrial revolution, which is a time when AI takes our jobs. There's questions around whether there'll be enough new jobs to reskill half of the workforce into. So what happens when AI takes our jobs? Well, most of us who lose our jobs will no longer have an income. So what happens to that money that would normally come to us? Well, that would shift to the stakeholders who own the machines. So it would be retained by the companies who own the machines. And currently we have a benefit and welfare system that provides a safety net to anyone who is out of work. And that's subsidized by the tax that's paid by people who work. But in the future, there's going to be less people working and paying tax and more people needing that money. So those benefit and welfare pots are going to be unfit for purpose. So that system crashes, breaks. And then we have a problem. Well, currently we have an economy which is driven by
consumerism.
Yeah, small, medium-sized businesses selling products and services, people taking that money, going and buying from those companies. And what happens when most people have got no money to spend? Those companies are going to generate less revenue.
And there'll be a drive towards more bigger and bigger global multinational companies. We see them. There'll be a handful. Yep. It'll all be consolidated. There'll be like one or two it already is like that. If you look at all the food companies, it's like from like 3 or 5 food companies. They've all got different brands and everything, but it's ultimately like 3-5 companies. And so everything will be consolidated. You've got maybe 2 car companies, 3 food companies, 2 media outlets. It'll all be just massive monopolies. Small businesses will be non-existent. Medium-sized businesses will be non-existent.
Exactly. And, it'll be the competitive businesses, the businesses that reduce their overheads and use technology rather than people, that are most competitive and that will survive in the fourth industrial revolution. So those small and medium-sized businesses will have to lay off a lot of their staff in order to be competitive. Most of them will not survive this.
Or get absorbed by the bigger ones.
Yeah, acquired by them, yeah. But ultimately this creates this compound effect where the less money there is moving around the economy, the more businesses will go under. And essentially capitalism crashes. That's what I hypothesized. So I was away and I was thinking, oh, so what happens then in the future when capitalism could potentially crash? Now, I think that Klaus Schwab, Yuval Noah Harari, and all of their cronies recognize this. There is a time in the future when we become, or capitalism crashes, and most people have no income. And the safety nets fail, and the onus then, therefore, transfers away from the taxpayer to the companies that own the machines to provide everyone with their basic living wages so they can survive, a house and food, for example. And that must be where the universal basic income comes in. So the universal basic income is a basic living wage that's distributed, that's provided by the tech companies to everyone to survive. But what does that mean for everyone? Well, that means that we become dependent on the stakeholders. And when you're dependent on the stakeholders, that's a scary place to be, especially when the stakeholders are psychopathic tyrants. It gives them the power to inflict a totalitarian regime that's unprecedented in human history, because we either comply and we get their money and we can survive, or if we reject it, we don't get any money and we don't survive.
It'll be indentured servitude. So indentured servitude is where you say, like, for example, I need to travel across the ocean. Can you pay my fare? And then I'll work for you without any money, So basically these companies will say, we'll give you food and lodgings, but now you have to work for us. I mean, that's another thing that could happen.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I also remember hearing a TED talk where they said we're in the era of oligarchs, and basically there'll be a very few number of people at the top who own everything, and everyone else will own nothing. There will be no middle class. And actually,
that's where the saying comes from.
Yeah, you'll own nothing and be happy. And the thing is, you will, if you want a job, it will just be like a masseuse. Your job will be a masseuse massaging these rich oligarchs. There'll be no realistic job out there. And part of me wonders whether it's not just the fact that they know this industrial revolution is coming, but also the fact that, I don't know what you feel about this. Ultimately, Richard, the fiat Ponzi scheme is coming to an end. It's going to burst. It's going to implode. It's making money out of nothing. So they know that's coming. So let's do a controlled demolition of the current system, controlled demolition, break the current system, and then replace it with something new that we're in control of and we're still on top. And maybe that's also where the depopulation comes into it. They don't want us around. And I've come to the conclusion that the vaccines weren't just about killing people. Actually, I think mainly what it was about was creating infertility. And what better thing, not just infertility in you, but actually your children will be infertile. So your seeds, your sperm, your eggs, they're not going to be able to produce a baby that's fertile. You'll produce babies, but they will be infertile in themselves. So suddenly, it's just like a demographic thing. The population will fizzle out. There will be less of us.
Well, we used to have value in the third industrial revolution and the second because it was all about our labour, and that was important to them to run their businesses and to drive the economy. But our labour is going to have less value because the machines will do a lot of the labour intensive
Exactly.
work. And we become another mouth to feed. Every person there is on the planet, it becomes expensive for them.
Are we the carbon that they want to eliminate?
That's quite. I've heard that a few times before. I guess the carbon is
because we are carbon.
Yeah, it's just again, it's just an idea. The sustainable policies is the totalitarian part of it, but ultimately we've got another big problem, and the fourth industrial revolution, losing our jobs. I think nobody's planned for this. Nobody's aware of it. And I don't think anyone understands just how serious this is going to be.
Isn't this just simply, I think I've heard this, that we're ending the age of consumerism. These big, massive multinational companies and families, they made their money through monopolies and control and the mafiosa style that they just operate behind the scenes and manipulate governments. But it was essentially getting us to consume. It's an age of consumerism. And basically that's now come to an end. They've got their money, they've got their resources, they've
won
got
capitalism.
They've won capitalism. Yeah. And now what is
they now need the great reset of capitalism
for an age of consolidation.
This is
am I right? So now it's about not age of consumerism, but consolidation. They've got everything they need and everything they want. They just don't need us anymore.
It's the perfect opportunity to shift us to another political system that Klaus Schwab has spent his whole life trying to achieve. That's been his goal. This is the perfect opportunity. That's why 2020 was the time when the great reset of capitalism was successful. And the pandemic, in the World Economic Forum's reports called the Future of Jobs report in 2020, explained that that it was the lockdowns that has accelerated our transition to the fourth industrial revolution, where the fourth industrial revolution wouldn't normally happen for maybe another 15 years. They've accelerated it to a point where 50% of us will lose our jobs by 2025. That was the initial projections. I think our activism has postponed that, and it's been pushed back to 2027.
But it's terrifying, but it's not difficult to see, because you got the rise of delivery companies, people at home working at home. You got the universal basic income, furlough pay. People were getting furloughed. So it was like
that was a test ground for the UBI.
Absolutely. So everything was being rolled in. We were just being prepared for it. And it's kind of scary. And then, the 15-minute cities, the restrictions, have you got your QR code? Have you got your COVID pass? You can't enter. You can't. I had Michael Griffiths on talking about how he's a playwright, and he was really upset because there was medical apartheid. They're like, people can't come to the show if they haven't been vaccinated. And that's when he went, no, I've had enough of this. So this is what's going to happen increasingly, these control mechanisms, draconian mechanisms. But listen, I could be a devil's advocate for a second. It's very hard, but let's just say with every new introduction of technology, industrialization, there's always fear, there's always worry, what's going to happen. And, industrialization has actually helped us. It's taken away, like we don't make butter now ourselves. We don't churn the milk. We don't wash things physically with our hands. We have a washing machine. So all these things, these automations have helped improve our quality of life, freed up our time to have leisure pursuits that we didn't have 200 years ago. It was just hard work and then you went to bed, So, advances in technology have actually improved our quality of life. Isn't there a distinct possibility that, all your dystopian ideas are just dystopian, and actually there's going to be a magical, beautiful period in humanity? We've got AI doing stuff and it'll just free us up to do other things and be more creative and not work like crazy. Isn't there that chance?
It could be, but it depends who's in charge. It can be used against us as a weapon. So artificial intelligence, first of all, jobs could be the first weapon that's used against us. The second could be that artificial intelligence becomes smarter with us and then poses a threat to us. And that could be a weapon to humanity as well. But it's all to do with policy. And at the moment, we've got a bunch of psychopathic tyrants who are in charge of this. You must have Googled, what did I do yesterday? I did something yesterday, and I got a result from Google to say that, it was to do with the food supply chain, which I'll come on to, which is really interesting as well. What happens? Why do they want to acquire the food supply chain?
Yeah.
So I come back to that part of it after I explain this. So they can't just give us their money, a UBI, for us to take that money and go and spend with their competitors, because that's losing money, that's giving it away. So as you mentioned, the financial industry, the banking sector is antiquated anyway. It needs to be transformed. So it's a perfect opportunity because they've been developing a central bank digital currency. And one of the key components of this CBDC is that it's programmable. So which means that they can give us the UBI in the currency of a CBDC and ensure that we spend it back with them so they don't lose money. But in order for that to work, they must own the food supply chain and the housing supply chain. So that's part of the policies why they're trying to remove ownership of farms, is because they need to own the food supply chain. But they don't want to spend out on breeding cows and providing us nice meat to eat in the fourth industrial revolution. That's why cows have got to be banned because of climate change. And that's why Bill Gates is heavily invested in synthetic meat instead. So, and genetically modified vegetables.
We're just going to be eating shit.
But they don't care. They want less of us there because it's less mouths to feed.
So, and won't they want just a subhuman kind of group of people who are basically sick, injected from birth to death, pumped with drugs, chemicals, recreational drugs, God knows what, distracted with, what is it, soma, with alcohol, drugs, marijuana, keep us in a dumbed down state, just consuming and, doing the odd work here and there when necessary human intervention needs it. But they want us thinned out, sicker, living less long. That's what they want, isn't it?
Communism is responsible for over 100 million deaths. It appears the tyrants get a lot of pleasure from killing people. And then you can add into the equation that it's more cost effective for there to be less of us on the planet as well. And
there's more for them.
There's more for them.
Less threat to them.
But yeah, so we're at a very pivotal time in our evolution. And what scares me is that the indoctrination is so entrenched with the climate change ideas that we will willingly give up our freedom, just like the Just Stop Oil Brigade are out there gluing their hands to the road to get us to stop having petrol and vehicle cars. They're already out there, wanting us to give up our freedom to travel.
Okay, so how do we fight back? Listen,
that's what's interesting is that people just think, well, we just need to be able to just reject it. But we're not going to be in that position. When we're dependent on them, then they have control. And
also, before I forget, I also wanted to say, I think they're using, for example, taxation as a weapon to remove property from us and wealth from us. So, taxation is already sapping 90% of everything that we earn. But now, they just need to increase inheritance tax or council tax or whatever, and suddenly you can't afford your property anymore. Suddenly you have to give it back to the government, and the government will be like, all right, we'll rent it back to you now. You don't lose your property, we'll rent it back to you. But it's coming back to you own nothing. Exactly. And be happy.
There's a few mechanisms that will transition us now. What we've seen for the past 5 years has been relatively easy compared to the next 5 years, because they need to get us now quite quickly to full stakeholder capitalism. This idea by 2030 of us owning nothing and be happy, being destroyed essentially financially. When we lose our jobs, won't be able to pay our mortgage. We're completely dependent on them. Living within our 15-minute cities, being educated from home, working from at home if we're lucky enough to find a job, a freelance job, working remotely, and having to comply to taking their vaccines in order to get their universal basic income. I don't want to fearmonger, but this is a reality and we need to take this seriously. So
where are the rich people, like the millionaires, maybe not the billionaires, but the millionaires who are they're coming for us too? Because I don't think they realize that, having 10 million or 20 million isn't going to save you. It's not
going to provide longevity. It might provide you some initial freedom to travel, but the opportunity to earn money long term is going to be considerably reduced. So those millionaires will soon become, will become poor.
Yeah, through taxation or whatever.
Seeing that's happening with the farmers already. Yeah,
they're going to lose everything.
Yeah.
So we need everyone to step up and stop thinking, oh, it's not us, someone else's problem. Oh, I'm better off than them. It's not going to affect me. Everyone needs to understand this is an existential threat right now. But it comes back to...
We've got a small window of opportunity.
Exactly. What the frack do we do about this, mate? Because we can't trust the government. The judiciary has been weaponized against us. The police are fucking hopeless. They're not serving us anymore. The military is just a mercenary force for the globalists. Who the fuck? Even people go, Bitcoin's the answer. I think Bitcoin's part of the agenda. It's programmable. You can track and trace exactly where every Bitcoin's gone.
Bitcoin's not going to be a safe haven for your finances. There's only going to be a few. But the big question is, how do we solve this? And we've got to stop working against each other, because at the moment there are in the freedom movement, I don't think many people are working together.
No, 100% not.
Yeah. And I think that we all need to turn around and say, okay, well, we need to create a plan. We need to be strategic. We need to, and it's not led by anyone. It's about everyone coming together and somehow coming up with a plan.
Mate, that's like herding cats.
Um,
So many egos, so many agendas, so many chaos agents, so many just weird personalities. I mean, that's what I've just discovered. You know, I was a perfectly happy orthopedic surgeon. I thought orthopedic surgeons were egotistical and had problems. Man, this movement, we're fracked up. I'm sorry. Like, I've been very disappointed by a lot of people.
Yeah, me too. So I've created a platform called Yellow Forum it's a non-profit, and just to provide some tools for us to become organized. And I'm using my experience in media to be able to inform people about this by creating films. I'd like to do a weekly debate show where we can debate all of these things with an interactive debate show. Everyone can get involved and be part of this. I'm not the person to lead this. There'll be better people, for this, for that role. But we need to form partnerships. We do need to find a way to be able to inform people. People like yourself and what you're doing at the moment are welcoming on me onto your show to talk about this. But it needs to be you taking that message to the next people, and then those people taking the message to the next people. Where eventually we need to be, on the biggest podcast in the world, explaining the same narrative. It's about informing people to start with, and then we need to inform the politicians.
Does that make any difference? They're all bought and paid for. They don't give a frack.
Most of them, yeah.
Captured, compromised. I mean, we can take all this information. What difference it's going to make? You honestly think they're going to listen to us?
I'm quite hopeful in the US that Elon Musk and Kennedy and Trump it doesn't appear that they are stakeholders. So as you mentioned earlier on about the millionaires are not stakeholders. It's only the stakeholders under stakeholder capitalism that benefit from this. They're the people who have control and the freedom. Everyone else becomes oppressed. And I've been following Elon Musk and Kennedy and not so much Trump. I still have some reservations, but so this is the way I see it. There is this idea here, especially in the UK, about controlled opposition. Russell Brand, controlled opposition, and so forth. I don't think that's true, and I think it's unhealthy. I think that the way it works is, as I mentioned about the Cultural Revolution, it's all about propaganda. It's about indoctrinating us with ideas that make us want this transition to a new political system. If, therefore, anyone is exposing the agenda and is pushing back against it and is not pushing DEI, is not pushing all the climate change rhetoric, then clearly they oppose that. They're not stakeholders. So that's how I see things.
Could it be that that's just their role, their game to play, that they give this offer glimmer of that there's some kind of opposition?
I don't understand the advantage because
you're still waking up the masses.
Still waking people up.
Yeah, for example, I saw a tweet by Elon that I loved, and he was talking about how, we should make as many babies as possible. And I was like, yeah, that's great.
He's been a massive opponent of
ESG. I've heard lots of things about him being controlled and we can't trust him. And where's his money come from? But equally, every day I still see things that I'm like, that's great. It's great. So I'm on the fence when it comes to him. Like, I really hope that there is a pushback from him coming from those guys.
Joe Rogan, the biggest audience in the world. Imagine if someone told Joe Rogan, explained to everything on his show. I mean, he's got 500 million views.
Some of my listeners tell me that he's completely controlled opposition.
But I don't think these ideas are healthy for us if there's no evidence. He's doing a good job, I think, by exposing everything. He's speaking out against it. He's pushing back against it.
Listen, it's the number one podcast that I still listen to, and he inspired me to do this podcast and this setup and everything. And, he was extremely helpful for me during the pandemic because I was listening to him and then like, oh yeah, I'm not crazy. And it helped me wake up my wife. So this is a classic example of like, if he's a controlled opposition, well, he bloody helped me and my wife like wake up. So,
a lot of people are not going to like what I'm saying here in the freedom movement, not going to like to hear you say that, because I think that propaganda goes two ways, you know. And I and
so,
if,
but what you're saying is, don't be too black-pilled. Don't be black-pilled.
Yeah, and look, if they're,
you know, I've been accused of controlled opposition.
I'm sure I will do. I'm sure everyone will do. I mean, because people are, they're anxious, and they have the right to be skeptical about everyone because of what's changing.
So I had someone quite prominent reach out to me and go, "Oh my God, I'm so disappointed on you." And he was angry on the phone, you know, because he sent me some messages. I can't believe you as a doctor promoting the fact that you took magic mushrooms, a psychedelic. You've got a huge platform. How dare you doing this? I was like, and I rang and I said, "Dude, what's going on, man? I'm not actually promoting. I'm actually going to talk about my experience. You don't even know what I'm going to say yet. You know, I'm not promoting." And he was really angry. And I was like, I've never heard him angry like this before. I was like, "Dude, why are you so angry, man?" And he was like, "Don't you know who's pushing the psychedelics? It's the MAPS people, Joe Rogan. It's all part of the government, the globalists. They want us on psychedelics, and now you're falling for it."
They want us off psychedelics.
And I'm like,
not to do any of those mind-enhancing drugs because they want us to remain in the matrix. They don't want us to think freely.
Now you're controlled opposition, mate. See,
yeah. Well, you know,
you're pushing their agenda. Don't you know Peter Thiel has got a company trying to sell magic mushrooms and blah blah blah. And you know, if he's behind it, I mean, he's a nasty piece of work. Apparently, some people say, you know. So
the truth is, I don't know. All I can see is that the people who are pushing an agenda to push back against the corruption and the rise in authoritarianism appear to be doing us some good.
Yeah.
And until they do something terrible that we don't agree with, then I think that we need to be supporting them because ultimately they have the largest audiences in the world. And this is about information. This is about control of information. This is a mind virus. Communism is an idea, and independent media is incredibly important during this time. So it requires people like you to keep doing what you're doing. That you will not be allowed to exist. I won't be able to exist with Yellow Forum and to be creating the films that I'm doing, and you know, the campaigns. One of the campaigns is to stop stakeholder capitalism. Right? If our transition to stakeholder capitalism is the cause of everything that's happening in the world today, then surely we need to stop our transition to stakeholder capitalism. Therefore, more people need to understand what stakeholder capitalism is. So the first part of this is the solution is we need to inform as many people about stakeholder capitalism as possible, about the corruption. So, you know, it's about getting this message out there.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think, and the reality is, if enough of us can see what's going on, for example, the DEI, ESG, sustainability, include, you're going to stop, for example, putting your pronouns at the bottom of an email. You'll decide as a company that you're not going to go down this route and promote this. Then enough CEOs get together and go, "Yeah, I don't like what's happening. I don't like what my kids are being taught at school. This is nonsense. I think this is a threat to us. This is communism 2.0. You know, we're gonna challenge this." And then enough companies, for example, rally around and say, "We're not going to do this anymore." The bank will be like, "Oh shit, we're going to lose our customers." And then someone says, "I'm going to create a bank that is anti-ESG and DEI. I'm going to get all the business from the other company." Suddenly, you know, you get this growth and multiplier effect, and things can work in ways that even the enemy doesn't understand. Because if this is a battlefield, a war for the minds, the number one thing that you need as a general you get taught is, look, all your best laid plans change the moment where you engage with the enemy. Well, the same goes for them. If we are their enemy, so to speak, they're waging a war against us, therefore we are their enemy. Well, we can be unpredictable. We can get informed. We can start rallying together, and we can act and behave in a way that they never predicted and scuppered their plans. And like you said, he's been harping on about this for 50 odd years. It's only recently they've got some traction on it.
Well, what happens
when this isn't a fait complete. We don't have to assume that they're going to win.
Yeah. What happens when somebody in Parliament puts it to Starmer and says, "Are you transitioning us to stakeholder capitalism?" And everyone, all the journalists say, "Well, what's stakeholder capitalism?"
Yeah.
"Oh, it's our new political system." And it's just about changing our narrative. And this is what I mean about strategy.
Isn't it political and economic system?
Yeah, it's a socio-economic system. It's an economic system primarily, but what affects the economy affects society, and it
affects your health, affects everything.
And because it's a shift to an authoritarian system, it's a shift to a different political system. So it's you can say it's a shift to another political system, and because that's happening undemocratically and discreetly, that's already wrong. You don't need to even talk about anything else. It's these people are transitioning us undemocratically and discreetly to a global authoritarian political system, and that is treason. That's it. And I think a lot of people would talk about Agenda 2030. Of course, that's a big part of it. That's a big partner of the World Economic Forum. The Sustainable Development Goals by the UN, all very important. But Antonio Guterres, I don't think he's influential enough to really have anything to worry about with regards to that. But instead of saying I oppose Agenda 2030, which we should all do because it's all part of the stakeholder capitalism system. But when you say that, people go, Agenda 2030, what's that? Okay, well, this seems okay. And it's hard to argue where with stakeholder capitalism, you can say that it's a shift that's undemocratic to another political system, and that's wrong. And every journalist needs to be writing about this. We should all be informed about it. And just look what happened throughout history. Whenever a nation, in this instance the world, shifts away from free market capitalism to another political system, when you move away from free market capitalism, all you can do is increase authority. If you've got a free society currently and you move from that, all you can do is raise authority. And there it all is. So my first film, all I wanted to do was to emphasize that point, that we are shifting away from free market capitalism to a global authoritarian political system called stakeholder capitalism. And this is what it is. So we need to all be concerned. The film proves that irrefutably. It's actually being sent to politicians. It was last week they're quite high up in our political system in the UK here. And that's really what needs to happen. More people need to see that film.
I'm going to put it at the end of this podcast, if that's okay. I asked you if you can bring your computer USB in and stick and transfer it to me. So that's I'm going to add this. I think this is a good time to end. After this, guys, you can listen and watch Richard's beautiful documentary. Can I ask you something, mate? Can you please tell people where they can find you, where they can read your stuff, how they can support you, whatever.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity because, it's a good opportunity for me to almost provide a call to action because these last 2 years has been difficult for me. So I stopped I raised a lot of money for my tech company. I built this tech platform and then I never launched it because I went and made this film, which was only supposed to take 1 to 2 months. But it's been over 2 years and I wasn't prepared for that financially to not have an income for that period of time. So everything I've been doing has really hurt me financially. But this can't, I've reached an end of how much I can do now without funding. So I've created yellow.forum. So that's yellow, the color yellow.forum. And it's got donations, but also a subscription where you can log in and join initiatives and to help fund us. And the whole aim now for me is to be able to create a media organization where we can continue our research into this. We can host those weekly debate shows where we can discuss all the findings from the films. We have a crowdfunding model on yellow.forum where other investigative journalists can get funding for an investigation into this. And it's a way to be able to finance independent media, independent investigation, to be able to expose all of this that's happening and then for us to create a solution. So the web platform again is yellow.forum.
I'm sharing the screen now. Yeah.
And then on social media, we are either yellow.forum or yellow forum, depending on which platform you're on. And I'm not getting, I've created a lot of content, but I'm not getting many people share it who have got large audiences to get it to the people who really need to see it. We've got a loyal following at the moment, a small loyal following. But I need some help.
Do you have a Substack?
I don't know.
That's a good thing as well to do, I think.
I mean, I'm doing everything at the moment.
I know,
so
mate, trust me, I'm the same.
I'm exhausted today.
But the thing is, with the Substack, you can literally just upload your video. Like, you don't need just a little blurb, tiny little blurb. I mean, because you've already made the content.
Yeah.
It's just a different audience. It's a different ecosystem.
Yeah, nice.
And what I'm saying is, it takes seconds to set up a Substack account. And then you literally just once a week upload one of those many videos.
Absolutely.
And before you know it, you've got another huge market. So I'm just suggesting.
Yeah. We want to cover all channels, absolutely. But Yellow.forum is an extensive resource on everything you need to know about stakeholder capitalism. We will expose every agenda, whether it's farming, whether it's the banking, CBDC. It provides information about stakeholder capitalism. We welcome other content creators to work with us, other experts to come and work with us. And what I'm trying to do is to create a model that's driven by a non-profit business that enables us to make this sustainable, enables us to grow and create more information. That's my goal with this. So, I would love any help possible. And my email address to contact me is info@yellow.forum. So, and there is also a for-profit business as well if you wanted to invest in us. But the funding is what I really need at the moment.
Mate. Okay, well, listen, I'm really glad I had you on. This is a really important topic.
Thank you.
It's huge, man. And, I said to you that this episode won't be behind a paywall. This is one of the challenges that I have. So, I started the paywall late last year around Christmas time, when I just realized that's it, career's over. I'd already been burning fuel, like my money, since September when my main place of work suspended me. But I thought it was going to be temporary. So I'd get back, and everything that I've earned this year is to pay my tax from the year before, because all the money that I'd saved for my tax, I had to spend on my secretary and myself to live by. So it's been a really tough year for me. So I get it, what it's like for you. And, I don't want to go into your personal details too much, but you told me stuff, and, you're not living it up. Life is tough for you. You're at that point in your life now in your mid-40s when you should be comfortable. You got your home, got a family, and it's not been like that. You've sacrificed your career to do this work. But coming back to the paywall, the challenge that I always find is, like, you want really good content behind a paywall. Otherwise, people are like, why should I pay for a paywall? But sometimes the best content is actually the content that needs to be heard by the most number of people. Mm-hmm. And compared to how many people pay for my content and how many are free, like, the biggest audience by 99% is the free one. So, I need your message to be heard by people. So, for everyone who's listening, again, please support me. It's just $5 a month. Like, your subscription isn't just the paywall content. I know that's important for people, but it's also to keep this show viable. So please, for the sake of your family and your future and humanity, just support people like me. Like you said, like, if I can't speak, how many voices are there out now in independent media exposing this bullshit that's going on and affecting us all?
I know how hard it is that you've worked and the amount of money you've put into this setup to be able to do something you're passionate about. You've lost your career as a doctor, which must have been very impactful, not just for you, but for your family. And independent media needs to be supported right now, because soon, under stakeholder capitalism, there is no room for independent voices like yourself, myself, and even Joe Rogan. So,
won't they just do things like just debank us? And, like, what could they do to us?
Or it's misinformation. They'll take us down for misinformation. There are laws now that they're putting in place, especially in the UK.
Hate laws and all that kind of garbage. Hate speech. We've spoken about the trans issue. That, for a start, could lend, and we could end up in jail for that, because so one of the stakeholders is Melanie Dawes, who is the head of Ofcom, and they now have the Digital Safety Act, which the maximum sentence for misinformation is life imprisonment. So wow.
Yeah. So they're clamping down pretty hard. They have the power now. So, as I said, Melanie Dawes, the head of Ofcom, is a stakeholder. The head of the BBC, Tim Davie, is a stakeholder. It's scary times.
Do you know, also, I think this is important to touch on this, but some people think of us, like you and me, just, grifters, living it up, just sitting in our basement, doing no work, not working hard, and taking no risk. And you know what? We should support people who are actually really, deserving. But I think people don't realize how grueling and tough it is for people like us. One, the hours and time that are involved. You see myself, I do everything myself. You sacrifice everything, personal life included, to do what you're doing. But also, there's always that stress because of what we're doing is so risky. We are literally on the front lines. We're in the front trenches. We are facing the enemy, and their wrath and attack is on us because we are going against them, and we're exposing their bullshit and their lies. We're not cozy. We're not comfortable. We are at the forefront. And I don't know about you, but it can be quite stressful when you hear about things like, I'm being told to wrap up now, as you can see, by the way. Can you see the messenger? Okay, I'm going to be okay. Because folks, if you don't realize, it's Sunday today and it's meant to be family time. My wife had told me never do any work in the weekends, but I really wanted to get you on board. I know you're going to be traveling a lot now, and I wanted to grab hold of you. My diary's rammed, and I wanted to get this out as quickly as possible because it's so time critical and people need to hear about it. But yeah, what I was saying was this work that we're in, this line of work, I don't know about you, but I don't feel all safe and cozy. I feel like I'm on the front line. I feel exposed, and it can be a bit scary and a bit daunting. Do you feel like that?
Yeah, I pretty much lost most of my friends and my family during this because I am not going to acquiesce, keep my mouth shut just to please other people's ideas, and that loss has caused pain that has part driven my relentless ambition to expose all of this irrefutably. So the reason why it's taken 2 years to make this film is because I have remade it many, many times as I've learnt more, and I wasn't happy with the original one. But now we have a 40-minute documentary that proves irrefutably that we're being transitioned undemocratically to another political system. And we need to use this evidence. It's evidence of treason. It's irrefutable. And I made it in such a way that it could be used in court if it needs to. And we need to take this now as evidence. We all need to stand up and be confident in our message. This is happening. And if you don't understand that, then you're indoctrinated by this propaganda. We need to explain that, like every historical transition away from free market capitalism, it's always driven by propaganda, the cancel culture, the censorship. This is all Chinese communism. And if you're not on board with us, then you're part of the problem and you're indoctrinated by these ideas. And we all now need to work together to solve this because, like I say, we've got a small window of opportunity and I am petrified. And the reason why I'm pouring my heart and soul into this, because there isn't a future for you and I. They will put us in prison.
Exactly.
That's what happens in China right now. So, you can't have an independent West. So we do have this small window of opportunity. The censorship is relatively weak at the moment, but they've put all their chips into this, the stakeholders. They're not giving up. And they intend to transition us to full stakeholder capitalism by 2030, and they'll use some crises that will destroy us.
Okay, buddy, listen, signature question of the day, right? You're on your deathbed, surrounded by your loved ones. Before you pass on and meet your maker, what last words of wisdom and advice would you want to reinforce into them?
Oh, that's a big question. I think all I've done is I'm standing in truth. As long as I am standing in truth, I'm doing the right thing, and I hope that I leave a legacy that makes the world a better place. And And I hope that these
So
films.
what's your words of wisdom? What you going to impart in them and say, look, folks, this is what's important. This is what you need to live your life by. What's your advice to your?
It's freedom is everything, isn't it? Freedom is the most important thing in the world. If we're not free, you don't have anything else that we cherish. You don't have love. It's hard to, when you're oppressed, when you're that severely oppressed and you're that unhappy and sick and all the other things that can happen to us, we take freedom for granted, and that's something that everyone needs to be aware that is eroding, and we all have a responsibility to fight for that freedom.
Yeah, don't take it for granted. Listen, thank you, brother. At some point in the new year, come back again, okay, and update us all about what's going on. All right, I mean it, seriously. And everyone, if you're thinking about Christmas presents, guess what? Go to yellow.forum. There's a donate box. Donate, anything. And no matter how small, if a lot of you do it, it means a lot. Same with me. Subscribe, donate. I've got a coffee, buy me a coffee. Little things will help us, folks, because it is tough, actually. I don't have any adverts. I don't know if people realize there's no adverts. I've got no sponsors. Spotify did say, oh, do you want to add adverts in your thing? And you know what? I didn't want to be beholden to them. And I hate adverts being interrupted. And I thought, no, I'll keep it free, of all that nonsense. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Please check out Richard's works and now enjoy the video.
Thank you.
In collusion with the world's most powerful people, the heads of our governments have enacted a 10-year transition to a universal political system called Stakeholder Capitalism.
It's a funeral of shareholder capitalism, and it's a birth of stakeholder capitalism.
You have shown us the way forward.
My name is Richard Jeffs. I'm a former TV producer and now a tech entrepreneur. In this series, I discover what stakeholder capitalism is and how its inclusive and sustainable policies are changing our society.
Black Lives Matter!
Black Lives Matter! Make some noise if you think that trans rights are human rights.
People are dying, children are starving, families are fleeing their homes.
And I explore an initiative called The Great Reset of Capitalism for transitioning us to full stakeholder capitalism by 2030.
The World Economic Forum is now very much engaged into this initiative of shaping a great reset.
This is a time for a great reset.
Reset the ways in which we live.
Join me as I investigate the Great Reset transition to stakeholder capitalism.
History is truly at a turning point. Global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected.
This is Klaus Schwab. He's the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, an exclusive organisation for the world's most influential people.
Around 1/3 of the members are CEOs of multinational companies, 1/3 are leaders of international organizations and governments, and 1/3 are from civil society, forming a truly multi-stakeholder community.
His members include powerful heads of state, from Joe Biden and Keir Starmer to the President of the People's Republic of China.
We are working closely together with governments from around the world, including all G20 countries.
This is a meeting of major world leaders who are deciding the future of the planet.
50 years ago, Klaus Schwab launched the World Economic Forum with a mission to transition the world to another political system that he designed called Stakeholder Capitalism.
In 1970, as a young professor at the University of Geneva, I pioneered the stakeholder concept. As a consequence, I created the forum as a not-for-profit foundation.
Despite support from influential politicians and royals, Klaus Schwab has been unsuccessful in enacting stakeholder capitalism. But his network has since grown.
Over the last 50 years, I have further developed the stakeholder concept into a global business citizenship.
Klaus Schwab has now become one of the most powerful people on the planet, enabling him in 2020 to finally fulfill his mission.
Today, the concept of stakeholder capitalism is finally becoming mainstream.
2020 marks a monumental time in our history. Led by this controversial figure, the world's most powerful people are colluding in an undemocratic transition to another political system.
We are talking about a substantial shift which is taking place to an economy which is more based on stakeholder responsibility.
Despite our governments and the media being partners of the World Economic Forum, no one has informed us. This transition is happening undemocratically and discreetly. So what is stakeholder capitalism? In his book, Klaus Schwab explains stakeholder capitalism replaces the two political systems used by countries around the world.
Concretely, from a system of shareholder capitalism, which prevailed in the West in the past 50 years, and a system of state capitalism that gained prominence in Asia and is centred on the primacy of the state, we should move to a system of stakeholder capitalism.
Up until 2020, when stakeholder capitalism was globally enacted, our lives throughout the West have been shaped by shareholder capitalism.
Referred to as free market capitalism, shareholder capitalism provides company owners, called shareholders, the freedom to trade without intervention from the government.
In countries such as China, however, freedom is surrendered to the state.
Often referred to as communism, state capitalism restricts companies' freedom to trade by granting authority to the state.
In an interview with Asian media, Klaus Schwab explains which existing system he prefers.
On the one hand, we have state capitalism. On the other hand, we have shareholder capitalism. So it's a clash between two systems. I believe that state capitalism in the short term provides certain advantages.
If shareholder capitalism provides us shareholders' control and state capitalism shifts control to the state, it's easy to understand who acquires control under stakeholder capitalism.
Stakeholder capitalism replaces both shareholder and state capitalism with a single global political system that provides authority to a group of people called stakeholders.
It's a funeral of shareholder capitalism, and it's the birth of stakeholder capitalism.
You have shown us the way forward.
Who, therefore, are the stakeholders who acquire such unprecedented global authority? Throughout his book, Klaus Schwab insists we are all stakeholders under stakeholder capitalism, and his new political system benefits all people and the planet. Hidden, however, in a World Economic Forum blog, Klaus Schwab explains who really acquires the authority.
To ensure that both people and the planet prosper, 4 key stakeholders play a crucial role. They are governments, civil society, such as education bodies, companies, and the international community, such as the UN and European Union.
The heads of these organisations are exclusive elite members of the World Economic Forum. Stakeholder capitalism positions these billionaire bureaucrats and dangerous dictators as a global government with authority over all people and the planet.
If I look at our stakeholders, we have business, of course, then we have politics, we have partnerships with many governments around the world, then of course we have NGOs, we have trade unions. Media, of course. Media, of course.
Here are Klaus Schwab's politician stakeholders, the heads of our governments, with the Stakeholder Capitalism slogan promoted above them at their G20 annual meeting in 2021. People and Planet is also promoted on the cover of Klaus Schwab's book about stakeholder capitalism. Back to his blog, Klaus Schwab argues his elite stakeholders will use their increased authority for our benefit, simply because they are people and make use of the planet.
All these stakeholders crucially consist of people and make use of the planet. It's no surprise then that they should want to optimize the well-being of all of us, as well as that of the environment.
One such stakeholder, who has now acquired authority across the West, is the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping.
The international community is looking to China to continue its responsible leadership.
The World Economic Forum have a large operation in China, where Klaus Schwab runs his ominous Global Future Council to
explore emerging models of Chinese leadership adapted to a new norm of globalization.
And Klaus Schwab is often interviewed by Chinese state media, where he expresses admiration for their communist system.
I respect China's achievements, which are tremendous over the last over 40 years. I think it's a role model for many countries. The Chinese model is certainly a very attractive model for quite a number of countries.
Klaus Schwab has also built a close rapport with the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party.
It is my distinct honor and great privilege to introduce His Excellency Xi Jinping. China has made significant economic and social achievements under your leadership.
In this World Economic Forum address, Klaus Schwab welcomes Xi Jinping as a stakeholder to govern us.
We should join hands and rise to the challenge.
And he encourages all stakeholders to enact stakeholder capitalism's inclusive and sustainable policies.
I believe this is the best time for leaders to come together and work jointly for the world to become more inclusive, more sustainable,
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
Inclusive and sustainable are stakeholder capitalism's two primary policies. Since 2020, they are responsible for the changes we've been witnessing throughout society.
Black trans lives matter!
Inclusive policies are based upon the idea that black and trans people are oppressed, and sustainable policies are based upon the idea that climate change poses an existential threat.
Klaus Schwab claims these alleged crises are being caused by shareholder capitalism.
By transitioning to stakeholder capitalism, he alleges the world will become more inclusive of oppressed people and sustainable by eliminating climate change.
In collusion with his media, education, and corporation stakeholders, Klaus Schwab has been propagating inclusive and sustainable ideas to manipulate us into wanting stakeholder capitalism.
The world which we want to create with the Great Reset, it will have to be more inclusive.
It's a strategy that has proven effective throughout history for shifting nations to communism.
Inclusive propaganda was the primary weapon used by Mao for shifting China to communism over a 10-year period called the Cultural Revolution. Originating from a Marx and Engels idea, Mao indoctrinated young working-class Chinese to believe they were oppressed by the capitalists, encouraging them to rise up and overturn capitalism in favour of a system that he alleged was more inclusive.
You were 6 years old when the Cultural Revolution began in China.
I just want to let the American people know that what's going on in our school and in our country is really a replay of the Cultural Revolution in China.
Today, Klaus Schwab and his stakeholders are disseminating Marxist inclusive propaganda to encourage us to rise up and demand a shift to stakeholder capitalism.
Reform is not possible!
Reform is not possible!
We need to defund!
We need to defund!
I want people to see there's similarities, and the similarities are terrifying.
Instead of targeting the working class, Klaus Schwab and his stakeholders are indoctrinating our younger generation to believe minority groups across race, sexuality and gender are oppressed by shareholder capitalism.
I feel guilty that I've not done anything vocally to help the people who are oppressed, and they've been oppressed for so long.
My youngest looks very white, so they would look at her and say, "You are an oppressor."
Marxist ideas such as critical race theory and gender identity are being propagated throughout education institutions.
Books like these are now part of the curriculum.
Encouraging young people to join social justice movements that are designed to drive a shift to a system that Klaus Schwab alleges is more inclusive.
This one is A is for activist. Each letter promotes a different form of protest. N is for no, 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 no.
We have the power! We have the power!
Make some noise if you think that trans rights are human rights.
And we have seen the signs of anger on the streets. So we have to create a stronger inclusiveness.
To allegedly make the world more inclusive, Klaus Schwab's diversity, equity and inclusion policies prioritise job opportunities to those of us he claims are oppressed. By 2023, DEI policies have been embedded into thousands of companies.
It has become commonplace for companies to commit publicly to take action on advancing DEI, with 2,200 CEOs and presidents pledging to create more inclusive workplaces.
While his corporation stakeholders have been forcing these DEI policies from the top down, Klaus Schwab claims, we have been driving the transition from the bottom up by joining movements,
including racial justice movements, gender equality activism, the global campaign for LGBTQIA+ rights, and the growing environmental justice movement, which have increased awareness and galvanized public action.
How do you define inclusive capitalism, specifically regarding gender, race, and ethnicity?
To make stakeholder capitalism appear more inclusive, it relies on equity policies, which are at the core of this stakeholder's presidential campaign.
When you take into account the fact that not everyone starts from the same place, particularly when we take into account race and gender.
Equitable policies place pressure on companies to employ more allegedly oppressed people, creating what Kamala Harris calls equality of outcome.
That at its core will produce the best outcome.
By increasing employment for the alleged oppressed, opportunities for the alleged oppressors will inevitably reduce, making equitable policies, by nature, discriminatory.
We are proud of the fact that equity is one of our guiding principles. Proud of the fact that we understand equality is important, but not everybody starts out on the same base. To put equity firmly at the center of our economic policy.
Here is Kamala Harris also sharing her pronouns to propagate stakeholder capitalism's inclusive ideas.
I am Kamala Harris. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman.
Later in this series, I investigate how the Black Lives Matter co-founder was educated by Klaus Schwab on his Young Global Leaders program, and her co-founder's admission to them both being trained Marxists.
I also think that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
I also explore how stakeholder capitalism's inclusive policies encourage biological men to compete in female sports, and how the stakeholders have been cancelling anyone who objects, labelling them as transphobic.
I'm sure there are still people who are skeptical about this transformation.
They have to trust that the era will be inclusive for them.
During the Cultural Revolution in China, the people who Mao alleged were oppressed were promised a more inclusive society.
But many millions had suffered or died as victims of Mao's rhetoric.
But their transition away from free market capitalism inevitably made everyone severely oppressed.
All his charisma hadn't delivered the new society he'd promised.
While inclusive ideas have been weaponized by tyrants for generations to shift nations to communism, stakeholder capitalism's second policy, sustainable, is Klaus Schwab's idea.
And finally, more sustainable, because the next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis.
By manipulating us to fear climate change, the stakeholder sustainable propaganda is also making us want stakeholder capitalism.
No! Stop it!
Climate activists glued their hands to sports cars.
I got kids to feed!
Sorry. We demand at this year's World Economic Forum immediately and completely divest from fossil fuels. We want this done now.
His poster child and fearmonger for his climate change propaganda is Greta Thunberg.
We are less than 12 years away from not being able to undo our mistakes.
And Klaus Schwab's solution to the alleged climate crisis?
It's the decarbonization of the economy to protect us against, let's say, an environmental virus.
The decarbonisation of the economy is Klaus Schwab's net zero policy.
We must accelerate its transition to net zero.
Which means banning everything that emits carbon.
The main solution is so simple that even a small child can understand it. We have to stop the emissions of greenhouse gases.
This includes our use of diesel and petrol vehicles, as well as travelling by plane.
We must change almost everything in our current societies.
Currently being enforced by Klaus Schwab's politician stakeholders around the globe, net zero removes our freedom to travel and imposes Orwellian restrictions on our lives.
It was all very jolly, laughing along as the police held Greta for the photographers.
If the police arrest someone for protesting, they don't typically stop for photos. Unless it's a propaganda stunt.
They all got the shots they wanted before the police then walked her away. It's theatre, climate theatre.
I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day.
Sustainable propaganda is designed to make us fear climate change, so we actively demand a ban on fossil fuels.
Are you more concerned about the protection of a painting or the protection of our planet and people?
And it's working. Many of us are going to extreme lengths to demand Orwellian restrictions on our freedom to travel.
Menschen frieren. Menschen sterben. Wir sind in einer Klimakatastrophe.
Conveniently for the World Economic Forum stakeholders who set the rules, net zero travel restrictions will not apply to billionaires.
Private jet emissions quadruple for a week each year due to the stakeholders flying to the World Economic Forum's headquarters in Davos to set climate change policies, emitting as much CO2 as 350,000 average cars.
You seem to be joining the establishment, not fighting them anymore. Are you not one of them?
One of who?
What, the people on the private jets and the helicopters flying in here to tell us how to live our lives? The point being, you have to condemn all of them equally, otherwise it's hypocrisy, right?
While our freedom erodes, the stakeholders reserve unrestricted freedom to travel in their private jets by purchasing carbon credits, which they claim offsets their carbon emissions.
We are grateful for your leadership on stakeholder responsibility in accelerating the transition to a sustainable market.
Like all stakeholders, the UK Prime Minister has a responsibility to accelerate the transition to Klaus Schwab's sustainable market.
We will play our full part on the international stage, obviously towards those net zero targets.
The World Economic Forum is where our leaders' loyalty lies.
You have to choose now between Davos or Westminster.
Davos.
Why?
Once you get out of Westminster, whether it's Davos or anywhere else, you actually engage with people that you can see working with in the future.
A more sustainable way of doing business that values all stakeholders.
We must forget about net zero. We need real zero.
Stop! Stop! Stop!
The stakeholders' fear-mongering is manipulating us to want the climate change restrictions that Klaus Schwab is imposing under stakeholder capitalism. In a later episode, I investigate the climate change science.
This is from NASA satellite data. Temperature has gone down.
And the stakeholders' sustainable propaganda.
At no point during the past 800,000 years has atmospheric CO2 been as high as it is today.
The reason you chose 800,000 years ago is because for 200 million years before that, it was greater than it is today.
Yeah, but there weren't human beings.
So how did it get to 2,000 parts per million if we humans weren't here? Your testimony is not serious.
They were all caught by Chinese authorities, who've been deploying drones equipped with high-resolution cameras and loudspeakers.
In China, how does a relatively small government violate millions of citizens' human rights without them rising up and overturning their government?
Under a statue of Mao Zedong, with their fists raised, groups of tourists recite their party oath, committing allegiance and fidelity, they say, to observe the party's discipline and guard all its secrets, ready at all times for sacrifice.
The answer is communism can only thrive by brainwashing citizens to want it.
Outside, some 11-year-old girls were part of a video project designed to teach toddlers and kids about Mao and the party. It will make them love the country more and feel grateful to the country, she says. A tidied-up version of history is fundamental to propaganda here that attempts to shape and fortify the Communist Party's past and ensure a grip on power in its next century.
During the Cultural Revolution, Mao indoctrinated citizens into wanting communism by propagating ideas that made them angry and fearful about issues he alleged were caused by free market capitalism.
Power in numbers! Power in numbers! Power in numbers!
I'm angry at 31. You angry at 16.
Klaus Schwab's inclusive and sustainable propaganda is making us angry and fearful today.
We're angry, we're mad, we're hurt, we're afraid. But that fear is going to motivate us.
People are dying. Children are starving. Families are fleeing their homes.
Making us want his authoritarian system that's allegedly more inclusive and sustainable.
What we're seeing now through the language of the World Economic Forum, this concept of stakeholder capitalism, which really is just communism in drag.
Replacing shareholder and state capitalism, stakeholder capitalism is a universal political system that empowers the World Economic Forum's elite members, called stakeholders, with authority over all people and the planet.
Welcome to Stakeholder Capitalism, a show by the World Economic Forum exploring how economies can be made to work for people and the planet.
Since the enactment of stakeholder capitalism, we no longer live under free market capitalism, and our nations are no longer sovereign.
The stakeholder concept, and particularly the ESGs, are a very important part of getting business involved.
To force us to adopt stakeholder capitalism, Klaus Schwab has launched a corporate credit score called ESG. E stands for environment.
In this section, we receive a good score for complying with Klaus Schwab's sustainable net zero restrictions.
S stands for social.
Here, our score improves for complying with Klaus Schwab's inclusive DEI policies, requiring us to prioritise job opportunities to people who are allegedly oppressed and support social justice movements.
And G stands for corporate governance.
This means the corporation stakeholders who govern us.
You have been a fabulous partner in promoting the stakeholder concept. What you did is actually to speak out on social issues. Your support for LGBTQ rights.
In order to receive a good score, more brands are hiring ambassadors from the trans community.
This month I celebrated my day 365 of womanhood. Check out my Instagram story to see how you can enjoy March Madness with Bud Light and maybe win some money too.
And the stakeholders are supporting other inclusive policies.
Starbucks says employees will now be allowed to wear Black Lives Matter apparel as part of its dress code, and now they're even making t-shirts for them to wear.
If we do not comply to Klaus Schwab's Marxist policies, a subsequent poor ESG score will mean no more funding. the CEO of the largest money management firm in the world and considered the most powerful person on Wall Street, Larry Fink, is a World Economic Forum board trustee. BlackRock focus their investments in companies with good ESG scores.
At BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors.
That's an investment criteria for you.
If you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race, you're going to be impacted, and we're going to have to force change.
By starving non-compliant companies of funding, investor stakeholders, such as BlackRock, are forcing companies to adopt stakeholder capitalism.
This will allow investors to see how the company performs on matters such as climate change, workplace diversity and inclusion, and as a consequence, a sea change in the way companies are run.
One elite who rejected his invite to the World Economic Forum and is sounding the alarm about ESG is Elon Musk.
We don't want basically some sort of communism rebranded thing, which is like a lot of what ESG is, to be inflicted upon corporate America without the knowledge of the actual shareholders, which is what's going on. The public is being lied to.
Elon Musk tweeted, "I'm increasingly convinced that corporate ESG is the devil incarnate. People who follow the World Economic Forum often warn against it."
Elon also tweeted,
WEF is increasingly becoming an unelected world government that the people never asked for and don't want.
And
how is WEF Davos even a thing? Are they trying to be the boss of Earth?
criticising our new boss of Earth will guarantee a poor ESG score.
Tesla, a company that makes electric vehicles, has a moderate to moderately poor score. Somehow, out of the 5 US-based automotive companies like Ford, which make gas-guzzling trucks, Tesla's ESG score is the worst. Why is that? The score is political.
What I'm particularly proud of in the case of the development of those ESG metrics is that the initiative came from business, from our 100+ CEOs.
And his 100+ CEOs will of course be guaranteed a good score.
So the company reigning at the very top of the ESG scoring list is, believe it or not, Bill Gates founded Microsoft.
With these metrics, the business world will finally be able to walk the talk on their commitment to ESG performance and the stakeholder principle.
Recently, I rejected a request from my investors to report ESG metrics for my startup. But according to Klaus Schwab, I may soon have no choice.
As regulators look set to mandate separate sustainability reporting requirements, we encourage all companies to join the Forum's Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics Initiative.
This mandate call to action is led by this middle stakeholder, the former UK Prime Minister.
We're announcing the UK's intention to mandate climate disclosures by large companies and financial services firms across the economy by 2025.
By the end of 2023, the UK and several other countries had mandated large company environmental reporting. And the UK, EU and Australia have announced reporting could be made mandatory for all companies this year. Introduced to score companies, China's corporate credit system now scores everyone. Their notorious social credit system is a stark warning for where ESG may be headed.
The state will go over every detail of a person's life with a fine-tooth comb, their financial situation, spending habits, career, even behaviour on social media. Criticising the government online is a no-no.
As with the ESG score, the Chinese social credit system forces compliance by punishing people who break the government's rules.
When Xiaowen Wang makes an electronic payment, her purchases tell the state a lot about her. Buying cigarettes would count against her. she'd be better off buying water. The cinema names and shames people considered untrustworthy, plastering their details, even their addresses, across big screens.
In a country that's banned over 20 million people from travelling for having a low score, you don't want to disrespect the government.
The Supreme Court has created a blacklist for so-called bad citizens. On it are companies, but also 23 million people to date. Among them is this journalist Liu Hu. He got a little too close to uncovering corruption among high-profile party members.
Once you're blacklisted, you can no longer get a bank loan, start a business, buy an apartment, or even send your children to a private school.
And it's not just our human rights we should be concerned about. Since 1900, communist governments have killed 100 million citizens, with many of those victims being in China over the past century.
Between 1960 and 1962, 30 million people died from starvation during the so-called Great Leap Forward. During China's 10-year shift to communism from 1966, Mao indoctrinated the young working class to rise up and attack anyone who favoured capitalism, resulting in millions murdered. In 1989, thousands of human rights protesters were massacred by tanks and heavily armed troops in Tiananmen Square.
China is an example of how citizens become oppressed when a nation transitions away from free market capitalism.
Today, Xi Jinping is leading an Orwellian campaign of control and intimidation, using the media to brainwash citizens.
China's lockdown on free speech and dissent is still in full force. Journalists are being arrested and newspapers forced to censor or close down.
Due to the Marxist ideology opposing all forms of religion, over 1 million Uyghurs and other Chinese Muslims are currently being tortured and often killed in re-education camps designed to erase religion throughout China.
Lessons are watched over by police, carrying shields, batons and handcuffs. And the documents describe the response to students who attempt to escape. If warning shots are ignored, the order's clear: shoot them dead.
The police who torture and murder fellow citizens are just normal people who have become indoctrinated by their government to commit these horrific crimes.
Were the suspects all men?
Men and women. Kick them, beat them bruised and swollen, knock their heads on the radiator. Police would step on the suspect's face and tell him to confess.
He was raped by Chinese prisoners who followed the orders of prison guards.
The police there ordered me to take off my underwear and let me
and bend over.
I cried. Please don't do this.
If you want people to confess, you use the electric baton. We would tie 2 electrical wires on the tips and set the wires on their genitals.
For many Chinese prisoners of conscience, torture and the risk of being murdered is more preferable than the punishment for confessing to the crime of having a religious belief.
Just for growing a beard, Tursun Kadir was sentenced to 16 years in jail. Many others have been jailed for listening to illegal religious lectures, including Tursun Memtimin and Ashigul Turgan. The documents don't say whether their daughters have been sent, like so many others, to the state-run boarding schools built alongside the camps.
He insists he can forgive the men who jailed and tortured him.
I don't hate them, because all of them victim of that system.
Based upon that system, and in partnership with the person who controls it, Klaus Schwab has enacted a global transition to stakeholder capitalism.
Today is a milestone in implementing the stakeholder principle into the management of companies.
A system that provides the stakeholders with a terrifying amount of control.
It's a burst of taking care of all the different stakeholders.
You need to commit to stakeholder capitalism. You need to commit to being net zero.
Our governments have been captured by communism. We are being transitioned, undemocratically, to an authoritarian political system and manipulated with ideas that tyrants propagate when shifting nations to communism. Treason is defined as
the offence of attempting to overthrow the government of the state to which the offender owes allegiance, or of betraying the state into the hands of a foreign power.
Our government leaders are committing treason, which carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. In the next episode, I learn how Klaus Schwab indoctrinated aspiring politicians with his inclusive and sustainable ideas and placed them into positions of power.
When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
I expose Schwab's 10-year plan for transitioning us to stakeholder capitalism.
We have to prepare for a more angry world. I see the need for action. I see the need for a great reset.
Which includes a catastrophic jobs crisis.
The unemployment, and the impact on livelihoods, about 50% of people in the world will be affected.
And I investigate the stakeholders' Build Back Better propaganda campaign that they designed to get us on board with the great reset of capitalism.
Build back better.
Build back better.
Build back better.
Building back better.
Build back better.
Build back better.
Build back better.
Build it back better.
Building this country back better.
We are driving a campaign to stop our transition to stakeholder capitalism.
Our transition to stakeholder capitalism will only stop when the majority of us reject it, so please help us create more awareness.
To watch the next episode and discover how you can help, visit yellow.forum.
I, Ahmed Malik, am a private civilian protected by the Geneva Convention. My Substack, social media posts and podcasts are my personal experiences, observations and opinions. This information is for educational purposes only. Although I am a doctor, I am not your doctor and I am not providing medical or legal advice to you or to the wider public. I am not licensed or registered with the GMC or any other licensing board. The responsibility for the interpretation, due diligence and use of the information from my Substack and my podcast lies with you, the viewer and or listener. Please do your research and use your discernment. It is not my intention to harass, intimidate, offend, defame, conspire, blackmail, coerce, or cause anxiety, alarm or distress to any man or woman, and the information presented here is done so with peaceful and honourable intentions. Enjoy, folks.